You get to have all the senior moments you want. We were just discussing that this morning. Okay, so we'll do our invocation. Let's just make sure our screen share works. Everybody can see this? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, good evening, friends. Here we are again, so we'll just remind ourselves what we're doing. Well, at least I'll remind myself, I can't speak for anybody else. We are trapped in these bodies. Somehow or other, we are conscious beings. That's the only thing we know, as Descartes famously said, sort of. And we look out at the reality out there, we try to make sense of it. And all kinds of models have been offered by philosophers and scientists and theologians across the centuries, across the world. Somehow or other, what brings us together is we have some sense. I think I speak for most of us, but obviously I can't assume anything. We have some sense that there's truth to be found in the ancient moksha traditions of ancient India. We'll just call them all moksha traditions. That somehow or other there's some truth that maybe because past life samskaras, who knows? Our samskaras in our minds have kind of latched on in some form or fashion to this large cluster of traditions that go by their names of yoga and Vedanta. So in that cluster we have a text called the Vedanta Sutras, which is really nothing other than exegesis is a word we might want to learn. Exegesis is how do you interpret usually a theological text, a sacred text, but I suppose it could be any kind of text. But how do you usually you find it used in the study of religion, but philosophy also. How do you interpret, especially a sacred text? How do you interpret it in a way that makes it come out systematically and coherent? You especially want to do that if you believe that the sacred text is divine revelation. Whether it's God descending, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, whether it's narrative transmitted into the ear of Muhammad by Angel Gabriel, whether it's Jesus Christ, whose followers consider him to be the Son of God, whatever the context is, if you believe somehow or other that a body of writing is sacred, is coming from God in some form, it's coming beyond normal chitta vritti, whether that's the proclamations of great sages from there, like the Buddha comes out of his meditative states, whether that's God revealing, somehow or other there's a body of literature, and the followers of that body of literature believe in their sacred text. So if you believe that a sacred text is divine, it's not sort of just human product. In fact, in Sanskrit, it's called Aphorism, not coming from a Purusha. Purusha here, Purusha can sometimes mean the Atman, but sometimes it's just more broadly a person. So Aphorism, not coming from any person, right? Which means it's not subject to the fallibilities of the human mind. So if you believe that, then you're going to consider your text, your sacred text, to be more or less infallible. And if you believe that, then you have to somehow render that sacred text coherent and systematic. You don't want to be a follower of a tradition and say, well, my sacred text is full of imperfection. You might, but mostly that's not what you find. I mean, some people might say, yeah, well, it was transmitted across the centuries and it got messed up along the way. Fair enough. But for the most part, followers of a tradition, prefer, because then you're back in the realm of chitta vritti again. Then what's the point of having a sacred text? The whole point of a sacred text is to give you something from beyond your own chitta vritti. If you start saying your sacred text it's been transmitted and messed up, then you and your chitta vritti, then you're back with your chitta vritti to try to figure out which bits of it are actually divine, which bits of it got messed up in transmission, and so forth, where you've not really gained much. So generally speaking, you want to, you know, and certainly the traditions we're going to study in this workshop, the great commentators accept that the Upanishads are infallible texts. They're eternal divine Vaidika revelation. They're Shruti, they're that which was heard. Okay, so the Upanishads are the Shruti. They were heard, and they were not heard from any person. Depending on the school, they're either just eternal, period. The Mimamsas would say that. The sacred Vedas are eternal. If they're eternal, then there's no question of any human imperfection sort of intruding. Or if you're a theist, you might say, well, Ishvara discloses the Vedic texts at the beginning of each creative cycle, but it's Ishvara, and clearly Ishvara is not going to be subject to imperfections. I don't think many theists are going to want to have an Ishvara that's imperfect. So either way, whether you say the texts are eternal and not even the Mimamsas don't even want Ishvara involved. That's how absolute the Mimamsa, one of the 6 schools of Indian philosophy, the Vedic ritualists, that's how absolute they want the text to be. They're not even, they don't even allow themselves to, they don't even accept that Ishvara, the perfect, all benevolent Ishvara spoke them. No one spoke them. That's one school. But either way, the texts are infallible divine revelations. These are the Upanishads. So, but what happens then when the texts seem to be saying different things in different places? Here, Brahman is personal, Godhead. Over there, in another text, Brahman is impersonal. Here, the Atman is an individual. Well, over there, your rivers merging in the sea. The Atman is not an individual, or only in illusion is the Atman an individual, but eventually it merges into Brahman. Here the world is real, you know, here some passage suggests the world is totally unreal. Well, other passages, no, it's real, but temporary. So what do you do when your sacred, divine, perfect revelation appears to be inconsistent? Well, then you have the theologian. In any tradition, so in the Christian tradition, you have Augustine, you have Aquinas, you have the great theologians, the early church fathers, Origen, Tertullian, and that's precisely what they do. Their dharma, these are intellectuals, fully trained in the philosophical systems of their day and age. So in the case of the early church fathers, that would have been Plato, Aristotle, the Greek philosophies, likewise Aquinas and Aristotle. So you're completely and utterly schooled in all the intellectual currents of your day. You're not running away from it. No. Theologian doesn't run, you don't run away from it, but you engage those in support of presenting your divine revelation using all those tools as philosophical tools, and you're going to show that your divine revelation is in fact coherent, is in fact systematic, and does pass the test of rational philosophical analysis. So as that's the dharma of the theologians. That was what the early Christians had to do, and the early Buddhists. So in the case of the Upanishadic tradition, then you have these Upanishads, but I think we did a workshop, did we not, on the Upanishads? And they're all, you know, they're certainly not systematic, consistent. They're certainly not systematic philosophy. And they appear to say all kinds of things. So you don't want to have an incoherent divine revelation. So therefore, along comes sage Badarayana, just like Patanjali does for yoga. You had, before Patanjali, you had all kinds of yogas. We find a lot of it in the old Mahabharata, actually. You have some teachers talking about 7 dharanas. Someone else is talking about, you know, Patanjali's got these 7 samadhis. Somebody else has got different kinds of dhyana is divided up in different ways, because you have all of these, you know, yogi characters, and they're just like with asana today on the high street. You've got vinyasana, you've got iyengar, you've got vinyasa, whatever it's called, vinyasa. You've got ashtanga yoga, you've got Patabi Joyce, you've got all these different ways of organizing, schematizing, and handing down asana. Well, right in our face, we see that. Right in our face on the high street. We walk down the high street, you walk past 5 yoga studios. What's all that about? So in the same way, you had many different types of yogas, you know, real meaning meditational yogas, And we see evidence of that in the Moksha Dharma of the Mahabharata. Patanjali comes along and he says, okay, Atta Anushasanam, I'm going to continue these teaching, and basically systematizes it. Once he does that, the Yoga Sutras then takes its place as the go-to book for yogic practice for the next 1500 to 1500 years if we go by academic dates. So as that is the case for yoga, and I'm going to be making these bridges for you, likewise, along comes Badarayana, but also known as Vyas, and he writes the Vedanta Sutras. And every single sutra is the clarification or a discussion or an elaboration of a verse in the Upanishad. That's all the Vedanta Sutras are. The 700 or something odd sutras, 4 padas, just like Patanjali. Patanjali's only got 100 and whatever, 98. I think there's 700 or 750 Vedanta Sutras. And every single one of them is engaging some cryptic passage from the Upanishad, some passage that Badarayana feels needs clarification, needs to be systematized, and he writes the Vedanta Sutra. Now that sounds all well, good and dandy. You think, well, problem solved, right? Because the Upanishads are unsystematic, but the Vedanta Sutras are so cryptic, much worse than Patanjali. Patanjali's got some cryptic verses like Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita, right? The Samadhis. We don't have a clue what that's all about until and Vyas tells us in the commentary. So many verses in Patanjali, if you just read Patanjali and they didn't stick words in, when you read a translation of Patanjali, translators sticking all kinds of words in. You read Patanjali straight, there's a lot of verses who don't have a clue what they are about, and the commentators explain them. Now, big difference between the yoga tradition and the Vedanta tradition. Big, enormous, huge, major difference. In the yoga tradition, all the commentators, starting with Vyas, and then you have, Shankara, and then you have Vachaspati, and then you have Vijnana, over the centuries, they agree with each other. There's no big disagreement. The basic, obviously they add little things, and they may disagree on minor things, but the basic infrastructure, that there is a Purusha, that there's Prakriti, that there are plurality of Purushas, and that you chitta vritti nirodha, and that and you have a Svarupa experience. Everybody agrees on that. And the metaphysics, everyone agrees in. Later commentators might bring in a bit more Vedanta flavor, but there's basically a tradition. You can say a tradition. Not so Vedanta. There isn't a tradition. Badarayana's sutras are so incomprehensible, you can't read them. They're supposed to systematize, but these are sutras. They're meant to be accompanied by exposition. They're meant to be accompanied by the teachers, meant to unpack them. So the first commentator we have is Shankara in the 8th, 9th century. And he interprets, so remember, the Vedanta Sutras are already interpreting the Upanishads. So now you have the third layer. Let's be clear. The source text is the Upanishads. But when you talk about the Vedanta tradition, you're talking about 3. Actually, it's more than 3, but let's go with 3, and then I'll explain what I mean. The Vedanta tradition is Prasthana Traya, 3 texts, the Upanishads themselves. That's really what you're interested in. You're accepting the Upanishads because they're Shruti, they're Vedika. That carries the highest weight. We use the term Vedic much too loosely nowadays. Everything's Vedic, Vedic this, Vedic that, You have a chai in Starbucks and it's Vedic, So yeah, we really stretch it as far as it can go. But really Vedic is just the 4 Vedas and, and 2 other genre of texts in the Upanishads, period. Sutras are not, they're post-Vedic, they're Smriti, they're a different kind of thing. Mahabharata, Ramayana, they're all Smriti, even the Gita, Smriti, they're not the Shruti, they're not that which was heard. So the Upanishads is really where the Vedanta tradition finds its anchor in terms of its truths that it seeks and that it seeks. Then the Vedanta Sutras is written. And they are systematic, but you can't be this. The sutras are so minimalistic. They're so 2 or 3 words. You don't even know sometimes which Upanishadic passage it's referring to. So then you have the third layer, which is the commentaries on the Vedanta. And there you have massive, major differences between what later be the various Vedanta schools. And there's really about 5 major schools. We can add 6 now with the 19th century Swami Narayan commentary. We can talk about 6 major Vedanta schools, but there's more. But there's 6 major ones with which have established lineages which survive over the centuries. That's what I mean by a school, that it has a lineage that then has its presence in India, has its sacred places and so forth. So we are going to look at the 2 commentaries, the most, Shankara, the first commentator that survived. There were loads of commentators before. Even the Vedanta Sutra speaks of previous commentators. So all of that's lost. So we have Shankara of the 8th and 9th century, which is Advaita Vedanta, non-dual. We're going to explain all of this, but we're going to, you'll get a sense of it as we go along. Non-Dvaita, Advaita, Dvaita, Dwa, like the cognate duo, duality, even the German two, TWO, duo. So the non-dualists, that's the Advaita school we're going to be looking, and the founder of that, or the main person associated with that, is Shankara Acharya, the great Acharya, the great teacher Shankara in the 8th and 9th century. And then we're going to be looking at the next commentator is Ramanuja, and that's the tradition of Krishnamacharya and Guruji Iyengar. That's their Vedanta tradition. They didn't share that so much with you, although I'm hoping that a lot of Krishnamacharya's writing will eventually be translated. And he was very, very, very learned, extremely learned. In fact, the whole lineage wanted him to take over wanted him basically to take over the lineage, to be the sort of primary placeholder in the lineage. Krishnamacharya was a very, but learned in Vishishta Dvaita. So we're going to be looking at these 2 commentaries and they're very, very different in their understanding of the relationship between Brahman and the world, Brahman and the Atman, and Brahman and Ishvara. They're going to have very different understandings of those relationships. Okay, so let's just jump straight in, because I doubt we'll even do 5 sutras today. Now, the first 5 sutras are basic. If you get those, we'll do those as thoroughly as we can, because it's like Patanjali. If you do the first 4 sutras, then you understand yoga. If you understand, 3 sutras, yoga's chitta vritti narodaha, that's the method. Tada kim bhavati, what happens then? Tada drashtu svarupe vasthanam, that's the goal. And vritti sarupya mitaratra, otherwise you're trapped in these vrittis. So if you understand those 3, you understand yoga. The rest is just kind of like icing on the cake, if you will. So if you understand the first 5 sutras of Vedanta, we're going to spend quality time on those. And let's not be rajasic about it. Yeah, just sort of, you tear through it just to tick boxes. Oh, I did that. That's not how you study Shastra. Certainly not how you study it in traditional circles. You go deep, you take your time, and you and that's what we'll do. Okay, so we are going to, for the first 5 sutras, we're going to look at Shankara and Ramanuja both. After that, we'll mostly focus on Ramanuja. As I told you in the email, I think most scholars, academic scholars who are not part of one sect or the other, I think most scholars will say that the Vedanta is Bheda, different and non-different. So Dvaita, Advaita. It's not radical Advaita, and it's not radical Dvaita. It's Dvaita, Advaita. It's both. So, and that's what Ramanuja's philosophy is. Vishishta Advaita. Ramanuja is Advaita Vishishta, non-dualism, but with differences within the non-dualism. And we'll explain what that means. But we do have to have a little bit of, we're going to have to use these terms a little bit. Don't worry, you will get used to them. we're going to have to use terms like Advaita and Vishishtadvaita. We'll keep it to a minimum, and but we will have to sort of get used to those terms. Okay, so that's our project. We're going to look at these two great acharyas. If you go to India, you see people with the sacred clay going this way across the forehead. That's Advaita. Of course, now it gets, now it's all become a little bit, now, but I mean, now in art, you see art, you see the deity. He's got lines going this way, and on the arms going the other way. So you just get a hodgepodge. But traditionally, this is Advaita, and lines going upwards are the theists, the Vaishnavas, for whom Brahman is Ishvara, and Ishvara is an eternal being. And the souls are eternally individual. They never they don't merge and lose their individuality. Okay, so let's just get that out and then read the text. And if you don't get it, you will. Advaita. In Advaita, there is conventional reality and ultimate reality. Conventional reality is a mirage. It's false. It's not real. But in that conventional reality, it looks like there's you and me and tables and chairs and the world out there. And there's a creation and there's a creator. So yes, there's Narayana, there's Vishnu. Okay, but that's all just in the mirage. Once you develop knowledge, all of that dissolves. You as an individual, that your individuality dissolves. And when you become enlightened with knowledge, then then there's no you really there's no you to realize anything. But obviously we have to use human language. Then you realize that actually you are that Brahman. They're non-difference at all. And the world never was there in the first place. So therefore, no dualism at all. There's no dualism between you and the world. There's no dualism between one atom and another atom in the world, or a tree and a mountain. There's no dualism between you and Ishvara. There's no dualism between Ishvara and the world. Any kind of dualism whatsoever. This is radical Advaita, non-dualism. That's Shankara. Ramanuja completely disagrees with that. He spends a fifth of his commentary completely refuting that. We'll see the page number. When we start Ramanuja, he's going to start on page like 80. You're like, well, hang on a minute, where's the other 80 pages? All of it a refutation of Shankara. I don't think we'll have time, I mean, for any of that, but we'll try to, pick up one or two of the arguments. Ramanuja is Advaita. He says, okay, everything's one in a certain sort of way, because everything is God. But within the oneness, there's difference. So Vishishta, there's differences in the oneness. And what are the differences? Well, there's a difference between you and God for a start. You're not God because you can't create the universe. You're mad if you think you're God. You're in a complete and utter state of utter delusion, Ramanuja would say. He doesn't have much patience for it at all. What kind of a God are you? Can you create a universe? You can't even grow a potato. What are you talking about? So that's Ramanuja. And so there's difference between you and God, and there's difference between you, one soul, and another soul. You do not merge. You're an eternal individual, whether in the world of samsara or in the liberated. So that would be Patanjali's position as well. Patanjali is not Advaita. Patanjali, let's call it pluralism, because there's a plurality of Atmans. So let's use the term pluralism, which is the opposite of monism. Shankara's monism, mono, only one. There's only Brahman. And because of illusion, we think I'm me and you're you. All right, so, but the most schools of Indian philosophy, all of them really, are not monists. Shankara is monist, and the Shakta traditions are half monists. The Shakta, the Tantra, Hatha traditions, but they're not part of our story. But Buddhism, Jainism, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, Nyaya, the rationalists, all of them are pluralists. There's a plurality of Atmans, and they're individual. Each one is an individual, eternally. So for Ramanuja, the world is real. It's not a mirage. It's temporary. The shapes dissolve. Well, everybody knows that. Even scientists would know that really, when we look at a table, it's really atoms, and you look at an atom, it's really a nucleus with electrons whizzing around it at, whatever, trillions of trillions of kilometers a second, the speed of the so I mean, everybody knows that the reality we see is not the ultimate, but for Ramanuja, the metaphysics of the world is real. The three gunas, ultimately everything dissolves in the three gunas, right? So let's say scientists say, well, everything, whatever they're going to say next, everything is ultimately strings or quarks. It doesn't matter, but there's real substratum to it all. So so that will be Ramanuja's position, and Sankhya and yoga, and and so forth. It's a real world, souls are real. Brahman is ultimately a personal being, supreme Godhead, from whom everything emanates. Okay, so we're going to revisit that. We're going to look at that as those ideas are articulated by our commentators. Okay, so on we go. Let me just grab a swig of chai. And we'll take questions at 8 o'clock. So we're going to read Shankara for the first sutra, the whole of Shankara for sutra number 1, and then the whole of Ramanuja. And we're going to make connections with the Yoga Sutra a little bit from time to time. Everybody see the screen? Right. Chapter 1, section 1. The first topic. Athato Brahma Jijnasa. Unfortunately, we don't have the English. But Athato Brahma Jijnasa. Okay, yes, we do. Here. Atta, now. Ataha. Therefore, Brahma Jijnasa, the inquiry into Brahman. Now, whenever something's in brackets, it means the translators put it in. And you'll see how minimalistic the sutras are. So what's the first verse? Let's go to Patanjali. What is Patanjali? First verse. The same thing, Atta. The same thing. Atta, now. Right? You're informing your readership. It wouldn't have been a readership, it would have been listeners. What is this discourse going to be about? Atta, yoga anushasanam. So Patanjali introduces it. Now there's going to be anushasanam, the continuation and the teachings of yoga. First sutra. So that's standard. Atta, the same atta. You see the atta there? See it? Oh, you can't read Sanskrit. See this? The first thing here? That's atta. You can read it in the Yoga Sutra. Atta. So and notice that start with the same word. Now. Is this going to be about yoga? No. Oh, okay. What's it going to be about then? Is it going to be about dharma? No. How about bhakti? No. What's it going to be about then? Brahma Jijnasa, the inquiry, the desire to know. Jijnasa comes from the word jnana. Well, it doesn't. It comes from the root gya. The Sanskrit root gya means to know, and we get jnana from that, and we get jijnasa. Jijnasa means desire to know. So now, therefore, the desire to know Brahman. Okay, that's the first sutra. Let's see what Shankara says. So what's this na? What does this now mean? What does now mean? Remember Patanjali, those of you that read the commentary, now means, does it mean now we have a human form of life? We can do yoga. We've been through all these other species. We've recycled, who knows, with infinite births, and we've been trees and bugs and all kinds of 8,400,000 species, right? Which is exactly what scientists say. 8,300,000 is very interesting. Ancient Indians have exactly the same number that modern scientists in terms of species of life. Does it mean, we've been recycling 8 million finally now we are back to being humans? Now we can break the cycle. Is that what atta means? Or does atta mean, okay, now you've done your studies, you studied the Upanishads, you studied the Gita, you dabbled with this thing, and you read your Tao Te Ching, and you read your Bodhicharita, and you read the Nagarjuna. You're just going to keep buddhi-vritting forever? You're just going to read one thing and then like philosophers, you read this and then you read that. What are you going to do at the moment of death? What's the use of all of that? So does now mean, okay, finish with that study. Now what are you going to yoga? Now you're ready for yoga. You're ready now. You know there's an Atman. You know there's an Atman behind the mind. Now you're ready for Chitta Vritti Nirodha, so that drashtu sarupe vasthanam, so you can actually experience that which you read about. You want to just keep reading about it and reading about it and reading about it, or do you want to experience it? And Patanjali says, okay, you did your reading. Now let's move on to the next step. Now let's yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, and then tada, then now you can drashtu sarupe vasthanam. So that's how Patanjali takes this word Atta. Well, how does Shankara take it? Now, he takes it. Now, remember, this is the author putting this in, the translator, not Shankara. But, so he'll sometimes take something from later in the text and puts it in. So now, after he takes it after Shankara, and we will find that this is actually what he's going to say. After the attainment of the requisite spiritual qualities. So Patanjali, that would be Kriya Yoga, right? Klesha Tanu Karana, Ashtanga Yoga. So, but this is going to be different. So what's this now? Now, after the attainment of the now means after the attainment of the requisite spiritual qualities. Therefore, that's the second word in the sutra, right? He's putting all this in. This is not in the Shankara. As the results obtained by sacrifices are ephemeral. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Whereas the results of the knowledge of Brahman is eternal, the inquiry into the real nature of Brahman, which is beset with doubts owing to the conflicting views of various schools of philosophy, should be taken up. Half of that is not in Shankara. But let's, do we need to unpack that? Or I think if we keep reading, okay. Shankara, 8th, 9th century. What's the mainstream? What's everybody doing? Are they all sitting around inquiring to Brahman? No. Are they sitting in the forest, Chitta Vritti Nirodha? No. What's everyone doing? Vedic rituals. This is the mainstream religious activity of the time. So if you want to, to present yourself in society as teaching from the sacred texts, the first thing you need to do is demarcate yourself from the Vedic ritualists, because the Vedic ritualists are also following the same texts, but they're not following the Upanishads. They're following the old Vedas, the Rig, the Atharva, the Yajur, the Sama Vedas, and another genre of text called the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas are people, but they're also texts. And those are texts about ritual, right? So in the 9th century, the mainstream religion in ancient India was Vedic ritualism. And what is a Vedic ritual? It's nothing very spiritual about it. Unless you want to say, okay, there's belief in celestial beings, and you do these Vedic rituals. You offer these things into the fire. The Gita critiques it heavily in the 2nd chapter. And you're trying to get boons from very similar to Greco-Roman. Why is it similar to Greco-Roman? It's Indo-European, my friends. It's not just a language that's connected. It's not just that Sanskrit is connected to Greek and Latin linguistically. Of course it is. But the culture is coming from some primordial ancient culture where the languages were what we now call Indo-European, but the mainstream religion is the worship of the devas, the worship of celestial beings. And just as in Greek philosophy, the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, they never rejected the gods, but they weren't so interested in them. They were much more interested in the pursuit of knowledge. And they thought, well, this worship is, is for sort of common people. They never rejected it. So in the same way, the Vedantins, they don't reject the Vedic rituals, but they think it's for worldly people. Because why do you do a Vedic ritual? To get something. And some of you have heard me use the term materialistic religiosity. It looks like religion, but it's really materialistic. It's got nothing to do with the Atman. You're asking for material things from higher powers. And, if you're a Catholic, the equivalent of that would be offering a candle to, Padre Pio, to get some benefit, or, go asking the Virgin Mary for some help with this, that, or the other. We'll call that materialistic religiosity. So the equivalent of that then is Vedic ritualism. Let's see what Shankara has to say. Now, in Vedanta exposition, you always introduce the opposing point of view, the opponent. It's called the Purva Paksha. So the sutra says, now there is the desire to know Brahman. So the objector says, such an inquiry is not worth the trouble. What do you, an intelligent man generally does not enter an inquiry about an object which is already known, or the knowledge of which does not serve any useful purpose. Remember, this is the opponent, not Shankara. But this is how Indian philosophy proceeds. That's what makes it very intellectually non-dogmatic. Maybe dogmatic, but you're always engaging opponents. You're engaging your intellectual landscape. In that sense, it's not dogmatic. So the opponent says, right, the sutra says, now let's inquire into Brahman. The opponent says, that's useless. An inquiry is not, why do you want to do that? If you're intelligent, you don't inquire about something which is already known. Everybody knows that because they're conscious. So you know about consciousness. So what's there to know? And anyway, what purpose does it serve? Right? And by the way, the objector is the mimamsa. You have to keep this in mind. Shankara's objector, he has several objectors. The primary one is to write this down, me, mum, sa, the Vedic ritualists who want to do Vedic sacrifices to get stuff from the celestial devas. The devas are the dios, deva, divine. This is an old Indo-European word, the celestial beings. You've got to keep that in mind. So the Mimamsa says, what are you guys sitting around talking about Brahman for? Useless. Do some sacrifices. You get stuff. You get, you want a child, do a sacrifice. Well, there's sacrifices to get a child. You want some money, whatever you want. Do something practical while you're sitting around just chitta-vritting a Brahman. So that's the objector, right? The objector says he's always guided by utility. Now, says the objector, Brahman is such an object. As Brahman is pure and unconditioned, he's saying there's no doubt or indefiniteness about it, says the objector, because we have such definition as Brahman is truth, knowledge, and infinity. Now, all the way through Vedanta, they're going to be quoting the Upanishads. Keep this in mind. The Vedantas are an exposition on the Upanishads. So in the Taittiriya Upanishad, you get the definition of Brahman. And it is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. Nowadays, we say Satchit Ananda. The term Satchit Ananda, you don't find that in the Upanishads, my friends. That's much later. That nowadays, everywhere, Satchit Ananda. That's not, you don't find that in the Upanishads, and you don't find it before Shankara. And I don't think you find it in Shankara. I think you find it post-Shankara, Satchit Ananda. What do you find then? What is the definition of Brahman? It's in the Taittiriya Upanishad. They're going to quote this a lot. So make a samskara. The Taittiriya definition of Brahman is not Sat, but Satyam. Satyam, not Chit, but Jnanam. It's very similar. It's not like radically different. But it's Satyam, Jnanam, and not Ananda, but Ananta, which means infinite. So the definition of Brahman in the Taittiriya Upanishad is Brahman is truth, knowledge, and infinity. Okay, keep that in mind because we're going to be seeing that periodically. So the objector writes, keeps going. So the Taittiriya tells us that it's identical with the self, which Vedanta holds. So there's no doubt about it. Well, what is it? Why do you need to inquire about it? The Taittiriya already told us what Brahman is. And anyway, the self is nothing but the object of the notion of I. You know what your I is. What are you inquiring about? Says the objector. The empirical self, which is well known to exist as something different from the body, senses, etc. Everybody knows that. So No one doubts his own existence. So why are you inquiring into Brahman? It's already known. Do you doubt that you exist? Well, you know you exist, so you experience it because you exist. So your very being is existence. So what is there to inquire about? So there is therefore no indefiniteness about Brahman, says the objector, which would induce one to make an inquiry into it. Don't waste your time. Okay, all right, everybody got their eye on the ball? The first sutra is, now there is inquiry into Brahman. Every single sutra, we're going to have the objector, and then we're going to have the response. That's how it works. The objection, and then response. Then another objection, and another response. The response is from Shankara, and the objector is whatever other views are out there at his time in the 8th to 9th century. So there's no indefiniteness about it, which would induce one to make an inquiry into it. Now here's classic Shankara. This is not Ramanuja. The objection that this empirical self is a result of superimposition of the non-self on the self and vice versa, and is therefore not the true self, cannot be accepted. This is all the opponent. I'm going to unpack it in a second. For such a superimposition between two absolutely contradictory objects is not possible. So, right, Shankara says, is only the Atman. So why do we think we're this body sitting in a chair, looking out at the world? Superimposition. Okay, what is a superimposition? Think of a mirage. Shankara likes the metaphor of a mirage. When you're in the desert, you're dehydrated, you're only sand dunes, and you project this lake and palm trees onto the desert sand. It's not there. It's not real. You superimpose it. You impose something on something else, and that thing which you impose isn't real. So it's a superimposition. You're going to run into this all over the place, so get used to it. Adhyasa. So the objector says, right here, he's actually, the objector is quoting Shankara's view. So Shankara is putting his view in the mouth of the objector. The objection that this empirical self is a result of superimposition of the non-self on the self, right? The body mind is the non-self, and it's superimposed on the self, and vice versa. You know, the self, even Patanjali says, right? Vritti sarupyam, you know, that you kind of absorb yourself in the vrittis. So, and the non-self is therefore not the true self. The body mind is not the true self. The objector says, this idea cannot be accepted. Why not? Because a superimposition between two absolutely contradictory objects is not possible. The objector wants to say, these things, by the way, this is going to be it. This is what you're expecting. This is it, my friends. This is Vedanta. It's going to be like this for 2 hours. So I don't know what to tell you.
We're happy. We're happy.
Yeah, but this is, you know, typically you wouldn't get, this isn't really studied outside of traditional Indian, you know, strongholds. But if you had any other expectations, you might want to rearrange your samskaras, because this is what it's going to be. Okay? Right. So, again, so we still are the objector. See the answers down here. You see the answer? That's the Shankara going to respond to these objections. So the objector says, yeah, they're completely different things. How can you superimpose one thing on another? How does that work? Again, and now another, again, meaning now another objection to Shankara. The objector says, and here's another argument, another reason to object to this idea that inquiry into Brahman is a useful thing to do. The knowledge of this self, or Brahman, which is shown above, everyone possesses it. What do you need to know about? You are Brahman. You're a conscious being. What's there to know? You know your own consciousness. What else is there to say? Everyone possesses it. Cannot destroy the world phenomena and help one to attain liberation, right? Knowing about the self is not going to destroy samsara, says the opponent. The world phenomena means the world out there, which remember Shankara says is unreal. You know, just knowledge isn't going to help you attain liberation. Why not? Well, they've been existing together side by side all along from time immemorial. Vedanta and yoga and everybody, Buddhists, Jains, everyone agrees there was no beginning. There's no creatio ex nihilo. That's an absurd idea. That's an absurd idea that the soul is created from nothing. Already in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there, it comes up once. And the father, maybe it's Yajnavalkya talking to his son, and he's saying, well, some people say that, the Atman is created. He says, well, how can that be? Of course, it's not. He doesn't even engage it philosophically. It's not even considered to be a worthwhile proposition to waste intellectual time responding to, that the Atman can be created. If it can be created, it can be destroyed. Anything that's created can be destroyed. So therefore, you don't have an eternal Atman then. So then how are you different from a tree or any other destructible thing? So no tradition ever accepted the idea of what the Christians would call creatio ex nihilo, that the soul is created from nothing. Something cannot come from nothing. It's a contradiction in terms. It's an incoherent proposition for an Indian way of thinking. So therefore, if it's not created, then it's eternal. And if it's eternal, well, where's it been then? Well, it's eternally been in samsara. Nobody says that you were once in the Garden of Eden and fell, or any sort of Indian, version of something like that. No, you can't fall from a perfect place. Then it's not perfect. If it was perfect, where does the seed of discontent come into it? How can a seed of discontent enter into perfection? Then it's not perfect, then, is it? So you can't fall. You weren't created. What's the only option remaining? Well, you were always in samsara. Excuse me, I just have to take some cough medicine. When I was a kid, 15, we were so desperate for intoxication, we drink a whole bottle of cough mixture. Oh, sorry. All right. On that wonderful tamasic note. Okay, where are we? This ignorance has been existing together side by side all along from time immemorial. So how are you going to destroy it? How are you going to destroy ignorance if it's been eternally in samsara? And as there is no other knowledge of the self beside ego consciousness, whatever, I don't know what the translator is, I don't know what the Sanskrit of that is, which can be called the true knowledge of self, there is no chance of the world phenomena ever ceasing to exist. In other words, you can never break through, you can never exit samsara. There's no other knowledge of the self other than your own awareness of being of the self, meaning you're alive, you exist. Well, let me rephrase it. You are conscious. That much you know. You don't know anything else. You don't know if the world is out there. You don't know if you are one with Brahman or separate from Brahman, but you are conscious just by dint of, as Descartes would put it, just by dint of even asking that question. You're conscious. So in other words, continues the objector, the world is a reality and not something illusory. Remember, Shankara is going to say it's illusory. The opponent says, no, it's real. You're eternally cycling, you're eternally in samsara. You might as well do something useful, do some Vedic sacrifices, get some good karma, enjoy the world. If you do your rituals right, you'll get the good things in this life, and you'll get the celestial realm in the next life. So that's practical, that's useful. Don't waste your time with this silly inquiry into Brahman. So the objector finishes up. So the knowledge of Brahman serves no useful purpose, such as the attainment of liberation from samsara. The opponent says, no, you don't get that. And therefore, he concludes his position, for these reasons, an inquiry into Brahman is not desirable. Okay, that's the objector. It's called the Purva Paksha. Every sutra, Ramanuja, everyone's going to start with the Purva Paksha. They're not always the same Purva Paksha, because Ramanuja's 200 years, 300 years later. Our Purva Pakshas are who? Materialists, physicalists, those that say that consciousness is simply an epiphenomenon of neurons, that consciousness is nothing other than some cluster of neurons, some neurological combination or context. That's our Purva Paksha if we're yogis in our day and age. So we would have different Purva Paksha. Back then it was the Vedic ritualists. Okay, everybody clear? All good. On we go. Answer. Now Shankara is going to respond to that. But do you see how intellectually vibrant it is? You don't just write your commentary and say, this means this, and this means that, and this means this, and this is it. And next verse. No, you engage other positions, those that disagree with you. That was a pretty good Purva Paksha. Shankar is, being fairly kind of, he's kind of giving a fair voice to, usually the Purva Pakshas are pretty good. Sometimes they're a little unfair. Sometimes you represent the Purva Paksha a little unfairly, but for the most part, not at all, my friends. These are real intellectuals. It's called Vada. Vada is when you really seek truth. If you really seek truth, you will engage the opposing point of view. If you run away from opposing point of view, or you're scared of what is a challenge, then you're not a seeker of truth. This is the Indian position. If you're a Vadin, a seeker of truth, you are not afraid of anything because you seek truth. It's only when you want to cling to your position because you're invested in it, or your identity is invested in it, or you're a big guru or something like that. Oh, then then you don't want, I don't want any challenges. I don't want to. If you're a seeker of truth, you will engage all alternative, coherent, sensible, reasonable points of view. And we see that especially in Vedanta, but you also see it in the Yoga Sutras. Okay. Right, now what's the answer? Well, Shankara says, an inquiry into Brahman is desirable. Okay. Because there's some indefiniteness with respect to it. He's saying, there is difference of opinion. So therefore there is value inquiry into Brahman. For we find various conflicting views concerning its nature. Different schools of philosophy hold different views, says Shankara. Superimposition, which is his view, not the view of others. Please be clear. Superimposition would have been an impossibility, he says. And there would have been no indefiniteness about Brahman, he says. If the opponent would have been right if the empirical self had been the real self. If you were really the body-mind, then yes, you're right. Then it's a waste of time inquiring into Brahman. But it is not. The scriptures, the Shrutis, remember the Shrutis. That which is heard, the Upanishads. Every time you make an argument, you have to quote, you have to find a verse from the Upanishads. We're going to see a lot of quotes from the Upanishads, just like if you're a Christian and a Christian or a Muslim, and you're debating, you're going to be quoting your Quran or your Bible to make your point. If you're debating another Christian, if you're debating a Christian, two Christians debating, they're going to quote the Bible. No point quoting the Bible if you're debating a Buddhist. What's the point? You quote the Bible, a Buddhist says, what the heck is that? I don't accept that Bible, right? So if you're debating someone in your tradition, you can quote your sacred text. So the Vedantins, the Mimamsas are in the tradition. The ritualists are in the Vedic tradition. So you can quote sacred texts when you're debating, not the Buddhists. Later on, we'll see the debate against the Buddhists in the second chapter. Okay. So hang on a minute. Let's get rid of this. Wow. This is going to take a long time, my friends. I'm doing a proper study here. And if we do 5 verses in 6 sessions, so be it. We're not going to water this down and just, do some, no, this is it. We're going to do a proper Vedanta study. Right. Now, the Shrutis, right? So you can, so you're a Vedantin, you quote the Upanishads. They say that the self, the Atman, is free from all limiting adjuncts. What's a limiting adjunct? An adjunct is something that's adjuncted onto you. It's imposed on you, like a body. Why is it limiting? Because the Atman is infinite. So you're stuck in this body, and now all of a sudden you're not infinite anymore. So it's limiting, and it's an adjunct. It's not you. It's something that's added onto you. You're going to see this term a lot. The real self is free from all limiting adjuncts, right? I'm a dog. I'm a cat. I'm a man. I'm a woman. The Atman is infinite, all blissful and all knowing. Infinite, ananta, and so forth. It's one without a second, and so on. The scriptures say that. Remember the Taittiriya, that the Brahman is truth, knowledge, and infinite. Taittiriya Upanishad. It's one without a second, and so on. This the scriptures repeatedly inculcate, and it's true. The Upanishads repeatedly say, "You are that. Seek the Brahman. Seek the Atman, my son. You are that. Tattvamasi. Aham Brahmasmi." Throughout the Upanishads, seek the Atman. Seek the Atman. So repeatedly they do. So the scriptures repeatedly inculcate, and as such, it can't be interpreted in any secondary or figurative sense. You can't try to give some other secondary metaphoric interpretation to it or allegorical. No, all the way through the Upanishad scriptures, the Atman is established. Never does it say this is an allegory or a metaphor, except, yeah. Okay. The empirical self is felt as occupying definite space, right? The non-self, the empirical self, right? The Atman is infinite. It's infinite. It doesn't occupy a limited space, but the empirical self is felt as occupying definite space, as when we say I'm in the room. So it's limited. That's what it means by limiting adjunct. As involved in manifold miseries, right? Oh, I'm suffering. Oh, I got lower back pains, right? So we're limited. As ignorant. Oh, I'm ignorant. I don't know what's going to happen, right? So how can this kind of notion be regarded as a true knowledge of the self? All these are limiting adjuncts, to use the language of Shankara. To regard the self, which is beyond limitation, as being limited is itself an illusion. That's the illusion, says Shankara. To think the unlimited self is limited. And hence, says Shankara, superimposition is a self-evident fact. It's self-evident. We know that I'm thinking I'm sitting in this room. It's self-evident. I'm not infinite. I'm not experiencing your room, etc. So it's a self-evident fact. The result of the true knowledge of the self, right? Shankara has to argue that there is a purpose to the first sutra says, let us inquire into Brahman. Keep our eye on the ball. Opponent says, it's useless. What are you inquiring into Brahman for? And Shankara has to argue it has usefulness. What's the usefulness? The result of the true knowledge of the self leads to liberation. And so it does serve a very, very fruitful purpose, right? The opponent is saying, no use at all. Shankara says, it's going to free us from suffering. Of course, that's useful. And now he concludes, therefore, inquiry about Brahman through an examination of the Vedanta texts dealing with it is worthwhile and should be undertaken, right? So let's summarize that. If you were the empirical self, then there'd be no reason to inquire into Brahman. If you were the empirical self, then yes, do Vedic rituals, try to cajole the gods, try and get the good things of them to give you rain and abundance. And then, the good things in life, and then you get another body in a celestial realm in the next life. If that were the case, sure, inquiry into Brahman would be useless. But it's not the case, because the scriptures tell us we're not the body. We're not these limited bodies trapped in ignorance and suffering. We're the infinite Atman. And therefore, of course, then it's useful to inquire into that. And therefore, the study of Vedanta texts is worthwhile. Everybody following along? Yes? I'm going to be repetitive, because the Upanishads are repetitive, but let's just go with it, my friends. Come on. Let's just go with it. These texts have been the source of great wisdom for many, many centuries. What the hell are we going to do? if we don't study Vedanta? What are we going to do? Watch telly? What are we going to surf the web? What are we going to do? So let's go along with it. Okay, it's 2 hours, a little bit of tapas, little bit of it's a svadhyaya, right? Second word of Kriya Yoga, svadhyaya. Second thing we do if you want to be a yogi, right? Once a week, 2 hours. We can deal with it. Okay, now he's going to talk about the words in the sutra. Remember, the first word was now. Remember, now, inquiry into now. So now, if you're a commentator, you have to explain every word. Right, so what does now mean? Well, Shankara says the word now in the sutra is not used to introduce a new subject that is going to be taken up, in which sense it is generally used in other places, as for example, in the beginning of the Yoga Sutras. Oh, look at that. Actually, the commentators would disagree with him. They would say, oh, well, that's not right. Now means now we have the human form of life. Now means now we finish studying your Vedanta, Shankara. That's what that now we can do yoga. So you'll see how they'll flip it around between them. But Shankara says the word now, it doesn't mean now we're introducing a new topic. He's saying like the Yoga Sutras use it. So there's going to be a little bit of banter there, a little bit of back and forth. Here's the Mimamsa, the ritualist, the Mimamsa Sutra. That's how you spell it. Those little caps are long. Mimamsa. So now it's not just introducing a new topic, neither is it used in any other sense, except that of immediate consecution. Holy smoke. Consecution sounds like a Catholic rite of passage, consecution. Sorry. All right, get back to that. So it's not used in any sense except that of it. So how is it used then? It's used in immediate consecution. That is, it implies an antecedent. If you say now, it implies there was something before. If I say now I entered the room, well, it means I was outside before. So that's what he's saying. It implies something happened before, which existing, the inquiry about Brahman would be possible, and without it, it would be impossible. So he's saying now means you have to do something first. Then your inquiry into Brahman will be productive. And therefore now means there has to be an antecedent, right? What does he call it? An immediate consecution. So what is this antecedent? It's neither the study of the Vedas, Vedas meaning the ritual hymns, the ritual, how to perform a Vedic sacrifice, how to light the fire, how many bricks to put in the fire altar, where does everybody sit, what mantras are chanted at what moment in the sacrifice. This is the old Vedas, okay? Be clear about Vedanta. Let's have a moment here. The Vedanta is the anta of the Vedas. Veda, anta means the highest point, the end, the culmination. So the Vedanta sees itself as higher than the Vedas. The Vedas are just for mundane folks who think they're body-mind, and they want the good things of body-mind, and they don't reject it. They say, yes, if you do your rituals, you get purified, and maybe in the next life, you realize that all these rituals are temporary. He's going to say that next, so I'm not going to finish that sentence. Well, let's Shankara. So the Veda anta is the anta of the Vedas. It's a higher kind of, it takes you to a higher place. It takes you to the Atman. What does the rituals do? Nothing. They just take you to a celestial realm. Well, that may sound well and good, but when your karma runs out, my friends, back down you come, and you have to start all over again. So Vedanta would say, that's not smart. I always give the example, right? You have $1 million, and you go to, or you say, oh, I'm going to live forever, and you go to Hawaii, and you rent a room for $1,000 a night. You think, oh, I'm going to be here forever, but do the math. How long you got? Not even 3 years. And then what? Then what? You're back to New Brunswick. Back to New Brunswick. And the Jersey Turnpike. You're back to the Jersey Turnpike, my friends. You got the Jersey Turnpike at 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so here we go. Now, this antecedent, meaning the now means you have to do something first, is neither the study of the Vedas, for is a common requisite for Purva Mimamsa as well as Vedanta. That's a common thing, no big deal. And it's called the Karma Kanda. The Vedic text, the old Vedic text, the ritual texts are called the Karma Kanda. The Kanda means a section. The section of the Vedas that deal with karma, ritualistic action. So the Vedic texts, right, by which I mean the 4 Vedas, the Brahmanas and the Uranyaka. Look, okay, let's back up. The Shruti, that which was heard, has 4 strata. Everything else is smriti, that which is remembered. So Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Gita, the Puranas, all of that smriti. The Shruti has 4 strata. 4 Vedas is the first. And those are the hymns that are chanted during the sacrifice. You're performing a Vedic ritual, you chant hymns to the devas. Beautiful. If you hear them recited, they're quite lovely. Agnamehele purohitam yagnasyam devam ritvijam. You can just go online, YouTube, and type in Vedic recitation. Quite lovely. Those are the 4 Vedas. Then there's the Brahmana text, which tells you how to do the ritual. Brahmanas are people, they're the caste, and they're also a body of texts that tell the Brahmana caste how to do their rituals. It's just like if you're a priest, right? You've got to do all your rituals. You've got to transform the wine and the host into the body and blood, and you do all the prayer. So there's rituals. They follow a sequence of things. So that's all outlined in the Brahmana text. And then there's a 3rd strata we don't have to worry about. And then there's the Upanishads. Vedanta is only interested in the Upanishads, primarily. Not only, but yeah, really only. But sometimes they might quote the odd Vedic verse if it suits them. The ritualists are interested in the early texts which tell you how to do your ritual. And that's called the Karma Kanda, the section on karma, karma originally meant Vedic rituals, by the way. Later it comes to being, what we think of as karma as action and reaction, and but the actual word karma comes from the actions pertaining to Vedic ritualism. You really have to get a sense of this. The universe revolves because of Vedic ritualism. If you didn't do your Vedic rites, the cosmos would cease to function. This is the mindset of the Vedic ritualist. They actually see themselves as perpetuating the universe by dint of participating in the functioning of the universe through Vedic ritualism. So on the one hand, it perpetuates the universe, but mostly they're interested in the good things of this world, body mind things, and celestial realm, not liberation, celestial realm in the next. This is Karma Kanda, and the Vedanta see themselves as Jnana Kanda, this section that is interested in Jnana, knowledge of the Atman. And this bifurcation is going to pervade certainly Shankara, bit less Ramanuja 2-3 centuries later. Shankara is operating, it's like St. Francis of Assisi. He's down there in Assisi, right? In his sack cloth, but he's operating in a world of Catholicism with with the grandeur of the popes in Rome and the bishops and huge, and corruption and right? But he's operating on the margins of that. So Vedanta yoga is going on the margins. What's the mainstream religion? Expensive, elaborate, flamboyant, Vedic ritualism. In a small scale, the Brahmanas have to do their every morning in their own homes. And on a big scale, there's state-sponsored, massive, great big, read the Mahabharata, huge performances of Vedic rituals that's sponsored by the emperor, with hundreds of priests and chanting, and animals are sacrificed. So the Vedic ritual goes from the huge, massive, sort of, we could say national, imperial kind of expressions of it, to the mandate that every Brahmin, the dharma of the Brahmin amongst other dharmas, is to perform a daily little Agnihotri in the home. So that's the mainstream religion. Eventually that morphs into what we see as Hinduism, temple worship, that morphs into all of that. You go to India, what's Hinduism? Well, you with temples, right? What's in your face Hinduism? Temples. Where are the yogis and Vedantins? Well, a couple of places, Rishikesh, Himalayas, Varanasi. But that's not the Hinduism of the masses. The Hinduism it's going to be temple worship. So in the ancient period, it was Vedic ritual. Really got to get a sense of that to understand Shankara's opponents. Those he's kind of presenting his jnana in opposition. But he's never rejects the rituals. Why is he not rejecting the rituals? Because the rituals are in the divine text. You can't reject the divine text. It's like the New Testament. You got to accept the Old Testament. Whatever you think of, Isaiah and Ezekiel, whatever, you don't reject it. You might focus on Jesus of Nazareth and the 4 Testaments. That might be your thing, but you don't reject the Old Testament. You might sort of politely ignore it. You might not have an emotional relationship with it. You might not quote it very often, but you at least do a namaha. At least you do a namaskar to the Old Testament. If you believe in Jesus, because Jesus was a Jew. So in the same way, you are a Vedantin, you don't reject the old Vedas, but you kind of say it's for materially minded people. Let's move on with our text. So he's saying it's not any of that. It's not the now doesn't mean you've got to do your rituals. All right. So what is it then? What does the now? Let's go into the next page. The spiritual. What are the prerequisites? What does the now refer to? What do you have to do before you inquire into Brahman? First sutra is now. Let us inquire into Brahman. Shankara saying, what's the now? Now meaning what goes before the now? Here they are. You have to do these prerequisites. What are they? 1, discrimination between permanent and transient things. You have to understand, and what's he really referring to? Vedic rituals. What are they? Transient. They can get, he never says they don't work. He doesn't say that. They work. They're transient. So the first prerequisite for a genuine inquiry into Brahman, you have to understand the difference between permanent and transient. Otherwise, you're going to be interested in transient things like the opponent, and you're going to be like, oh, why am I wasting my time? Let me go do a Vedic ritual, and I'll get at least I get something out of it. So you have to. This is called viveka, by the way. Viveka. 2, renunciation of the enjoyment of fruits of action in this world and in the next. Tyaga. This is tyaga, vairagya. This is vairagya, my friends. Vairagya. We've heard of vairagya. Let me get the Sanskrit. Yes, so we have nitya vastu viveka. The first one is viveka. But what kind of viveka? What is Patanjali says viveka is viveka gets rid of this avidya, right? But viveka is used by Shankara as nitya vastu vivekaha, to know the difference between permanent, the Atman, and transient, the Vedic ritual, the benefits of Vedic ritualism and karma. 2, and the Sanskrit is vairagya. Iha amutra bhoga vairagya. How does he define vairagya? Renunciation of the enjoyment of fruits of action, the desire, in this world and in the next. You have to give up desire for things in this world. And what's the next world? Not liberation, celestial realms. Because the celestial realms are transient. The first one is viveka, be smart. Don't aspire for the celestial realm. Why not? Because it's transient. As soon as your karma burns up, down you come. That was the first one. The second one is vairagya. Give up any desire for these things. And how does Patanjali divine it? Same thing. Drishta, Vairagya, he says, Vairagya, he says, Drishtanushravika Vishaya, Drishtanushravika Vishaya, Vitrishnasya, Vashikara Samjna, Vairagya. Patanjali gives a very, very similar definition. Drishtanushravika, Drishta, things in this world, Shravika, things you've heard about the next world, the celestial realm. It's identical. Actually, do you want to look at it? Oh, well, we've got enough on our hands. All right, we can look at Patanjali if you want, but maybe not. Okay, 3. All right, so what are the prerequisites before we're qualified, before we're going to get real benefit from our inquiry into Brahman? We have to have 6 qualifications. We have to have Viveka, Vairagya, number 3, the 6 treasures. And so you have, what are the 6 treasures? Well, you have Sama, Dhamma, Sadhana. One of them we recognize, Sadhana. How does he translate them? Sama, Dhamma, Uparati, Titiksha, and Samadhana and Shraddha. Right, so these are so you have to cultivate these things. Shama means tranquility. The first one, Shama means, that's where we get the word Shanti. So you have to be, your mind has to be peaceful, content. That's Shama. Dhamma means control, the same as Tapasya. Dhamma. Uparati. It's basically giving up, especially sexual desire. Rati is used, he's just got, not thinking of things of the senses, but uparati is usually associated with rati is sexual desire. So sama is contentment, dhamma is control. These are all number 3, the 6 treasures in number 3, right? We're on the 3rd out of 4, by the way, I'm sorry, I said 6. There's 4 prerequisites for Shankara. Right, and then titiksha, tolerance. Titiksha, he's got forbearance. You have to tolerate, just keep going. You have to tolerate all of the conditions of samsara while we're on the path. No point getting angry with Ishvara, my friends. No point shaking your fist at the heavens. Ishvara, I'm such a good bhakta. Why do you smash me all the time? Why do you humiliate me all the time? No good, my friends, no good. Gets you nowhere. You think Ishvara's going to like, oh, I'm sorry, let me, I'm so sorry, let me fix everything. No. Titiksha, toleration, to tolerate. Okay, what else? Samadhana, which is fixing the mind on Ishvara. Samadhana. Remember, Ishvara for Shankara is also part of the illusion. There's only impersonal, non-personal Brahman, no qualities, no form, no individuality. Shankara will accept bhakti, but only as a path, as a means. Once you get enlightened, everything dissolves. No bhakti, no bhakta, no Bhagavan, no world, no Atman, everything dissolves. Sarvamidam Kalu Brahman, only impersonal Brahman remains. Keep that. So whenever he talks about Ishvara, he's saying, yes, that's, in conventional reality, you do bhakti, it's good, it purifies your mind. But when you become enlightened, no more bhakti, my friends. In Shankara, huge difference with Ramanuja. Because Ramanuja, Vishnu is eternal, bhakti is eternal, the soul is eternal, whether in samsara or in the liberated state, Vaikuntha. We'll talk more about that as we proceed. Right, what are the, okay, what else? Shraddha, you have to have faith. I mean, you have to keep, you have to have faith that that there is an Atman, or at least that there's worth investigating. There has to be some faith that maybe I'm not the body. Maybe there is this Brahman. Maybe, there is value to yoga. You can't do yoga unless you have some faith until you realize, okay, Patanjali is going to say, look, you can experience it, chittavritti nirodha, and then tada drashtu sarupe vastanam. You still your mind, tada drashtu sarupe vastanam, and then you'll experience it. But before you experience it, you have to have faith that it's there. you're going to chitta vritti nirodha. It's not that it's going to, in one day or a week or a month, you're going to have a tada drashtu sarupe vastanam. So that whole period of time between you pick up the practice until you have your eureka moment, you're driven by faith. You can't do yoga without faith. It's not that you read about the Atman, bada boom, and you experience it next second. Of course not. So faith is, Patanjali doesn't talk about faith, but he does somewhere, Shraddha. I think does he use the word Shraddha? He does. Jill, which verse does he use the word Shraddha? You're muted.
It's 120.
And what is it? What is the 120?
Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaka, Itaresham.
Yes, it's
Yoga vitamin.
very good. Same thing then, isn't it? It's preceded by faith. Look, 120. There it is. Look, before you get to Samadhi, you have to start off with Shraddha. And then Virya, and you've got to, you got to keep going. You got to have some Virya. Virya means potency, energy, dedication, vir. That's where you get the Latin vir, a man, or we get the English virile, right? Virile, obviously we use it sexually, but it's the same root, vir. You got to have, you got to put some energy into your practice, right? So you have faith, you got to be enthusiastic, smriti, you got to keep the goal, memory, keep it in mind. And then you get samadhi, prajna, purvaka, right? So we have the same kind of thing here. Interesting, thank you. 120, look, you guys are awesome. Svadhyaya, Svadhyaya volleys. Okay, so therefore, no, wrong one. Shankara. Okay, so there it is. And look at this. Number 4. You have to have a desire for liberation. This has got nothing to do with the ragas. Raga is desire for body, mind experiences. Raga, that is the klesha of Patanjali. It is, raga is a desire for a physical experience, an emotional experience. Vairagya means to be free of that. But desire for liberation, completely different thing. Why? Because it's a desire for the Atman. And so what are the prerequisites for Shankara? 4 things. The 4th one is a desire for liberation. Why would you take up the path of Vedanta or yoga unless you desire the Atman? Of course you have to desire the Atman. This has got nothing to do with the klishta. Remember, look at Patanjali. Let's take a moment here. People don't, I think, focus on this enough. Look, in the Yoga Sutras, right at the beginning, we have, look, the vrittis are 5 and they're klishta or aklishta. So the klishta vrittis, he tells us what they are. In chapter 2, the klishta vrittis are avidya, asmita, dragadvesha, abhinivesha. Well, what's aklishta then? The opposite. Desire for liberation. Vidya is the opposite of avidya. Brahmasmi is the opposite of asmita. Brahmasmi, who am I then? I'm Brahman. What's the opposite of raga? Raga for the Atman. So Shankar comes right out and places it right there in one of the 4. Remember, he's talking about the prerequisites. He's talking about the word now. The first word of the okay, now let's go to Shankara. Ramanuja. We're on page 81. Why are we on page 81, my friends? 1.1.1. Why are we on page 81? He spent 80 pages refuting Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. How about that for getting it off your chest? He gets it right off his chest. I mean, the arguments are absolutely, I mean, and you read that, you'll be, it'll really give you something. We don't really have time to get into all of that, but he's just spent 1/5 of the entire commentary rejecting this idea that the world is a false superimposition, rejecting the idea that the Atman is Brahman. No, it's a spark, it's a little portion, it's a part, but it's always an individual. And establishing that Brahman in its highest form is Ishvara. Remember, for Shankara, Ishvara is part of the mirage. Ishvara dissolves when you get enlightened. Ramanuja doesn't like that at all. You're going to tell him his beloved Narayana is a mirage? Oh, he's going to come after you 80 pages of guns blazing, intellectual bang, 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 tearing into Advaita Vedanta. And if you're interested in looking at a couple of those arguments at some point, we'll have to make time for that. Okay, so now he starts the actual verse. 81, look, page 81. What does Ramanuja say? Okay, it's going to, now obviously he comes 200 years after Shankara. He's going to say some of the things he says. He doesn't have a problem quoting Shankara as long as Shankara is not going off on Advaita Vedanta. But a lot of the things he accepts from Shankara, as long as Shankara doesn't start saying that the Atman is Brahman or that Narayana is an illusion, as long as he doesn't go trespass into territory that Ramanuja holds to be true and real, otherwise he'll quote Shankara respectfully, and he'll accept many of the things. So we might find some overlap in the commentaries, is what I'm saying, and let's see if that's the case. Right, so what is the now? He takes it differently. The now for Shankara is, before inquiry into Brahman, you have to do those 4 things. Vairagya, you have to have the 6 treasures, you have to have a desire for liberation, and so forth. Ramanuja takes it differently. So what's the now? It's after what? After an inquiry into the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. So first you have to look at it, for Ramanuja, first you look at the ritualistic portion of the Vedas, and then you reject them, and you're ready for Vedanta. How so? Because after inquiry into the, not Brahman, but you start off like everybody else in society at that time. Remember, I said the mainstream religion is ritualism. So after an inquiry into the ritualistic portion of the Vedas, one comes to know by examining them that results acquired by mere sacrifices are ephemeral. On the contrary, the results of the knowledge of Brahman is eternal. As such, an inquiry into Brahman should be taken up. Is everybody clear? For Ramanuja, the now means, first of all, study the Vedic rituals. Of course, they're sacred texts. Read the 4 Vedas, read the Brahmanas. But by studying them, you'll realize, hang on a minute, if I do these sacrifices, whatever I get from them is temporary. Maybe it will rain, but then the next day it's going to not rain anymore. Maybe I'll go to the celestial realm if I do a lifetime's worth of ritual, but I have to come back down again. So you realize that it's temporary. So that's how he takes the now. When you realize that, then an inquiry into Brahman should be taken up. So now he has the necessity of such an inquiry is questioned. So now he's saying, now he's going to introduce the opponent. Same opponent, right? To start with, by the Mimamsakas. So now his opponent is the Mimamsakas. So the objection is the Mimamsakas. Let's see if it's the same as Shankara, a bit different. So what is the objection Ramanuja introduces? There's no need to know Brahman, says the objector, the knowledge of which is attained after great effort. But the result of such knowledge is the attainment of immortality, which can also be had by rituals, as is declared by texts like, drinking soma, we have become immortal. So the opponent is saying, what do you need to inquire into Brahman? If you do rituals and offer the soma, soma is some kind of an intoxicating beverage that was imbibed during the Vedic rituals. Okay, so the Mimamsas are the ritualists. The ritualists, you'll get to go to the celestial realm. What do you need to know about Brahman for? And they quote their sacred texts. What are the Mimamsa sacred texts? The Vedas and the Brahmanas. Is this falling into place, my friends? Who's lost? Jill, why are you lost? All right, let's wait for questions. We got 29 minutes. Okay. 4 strata of the Vedic corpus. The first strata are the 4 Vedas themselves. hymns that are recited during the sacrifice. 4 strata of the Vedic texts. 2.5 of them deal with rituals. 1.5 deal with Atman, the pursuit of Atman and Brahman. Forget about the 3rd strata. It's just going to confuse us. Let's just focus on 3 out of the 4. The first 2 are dealing with rituals. The first one, the 4 Vedas, are the hymns that are recited during the ritual. The 2nd strata tells you how to do the ritual. Where do you sit? How do you line up the implements? What sacrifice gives you what kind of result? How do you get to the celestial realm? How do you make it rain? How do you get progeny? There's loads and loads and loads of different kinds of rituals. Right. So let's just go with those 2 strata. The Mimamsas are interested in that. And they say, look, it's our sacred text, and they're right. Vedanta is not interested in that. They say that's all temporary. They don't say it doesn't work. Temporary. Even you go to the celestial realm, temporary, you come back down. So the Vedanta is Vedanta. We're the end of it. We're the highest part of all of that. We're going to give you Atman Brahman, which is eternal. All right, so this is an important context to know, to understand what the concerns are 1,200 years ago. So the objector is the Mimamsa, the ritualist says, look, you can get to the celestial realm and become immortal there. Actually, you can't. Ramanuja is going to say, no, it seems like it's eternal in the celestial realm because you live millions of years there, but it's not. But the Mimamsa is saying, we can go up to the celestial realm. It's more or less eternal. We drink soma, right? We're drinking soma juice. We've become, and they're quoting the Vedas. Ramanuja answers, the results of work are ephemeral, all your rituals. They can never give permanent results. And so it cannot help us to attain immortality. And then he quotes the Mundaka Upanishads, right? Because you have to quote something to support your case. And so the MU, that's Mundaka Upanishad, 1.2.12. And he quotes, having examined the worlds attainable through works, a Brahmana should get dispassionate, vairagya, towards them. Looking at the world, we should generate dispassion, disinterest. Why? Because everything that we get in the world is simply temporary. We cannot hang on to any enjoyment. We can't even hang on to our youth, nothing. Right, and he quotes all these scriptures. Now, what about this, the quote that the Mimamsa gave about drinking soma? Look at it down here. We're going to jump a bit. Ramanuja says at the bottom of the page, what is stated by drinking soma, we have become immortal, because there is a verse that says, if you drink soma during the ritual, you'll become immortal. So what's Ramanuja going to do with that? After all, that's also a quote from the sacred text. Ramanuja said, it shouldn't be taken literally, but in a relative sense only. You know, immortal meaning, sure, you can live in the celestial realm for thousands and thousands of years. It seems like it's immortal, but really it's not literal. So Brahman should be known. All right, let's jump around because we are going to, oh my goodness. We just spent, should we just finish this up? I'm not gonna rush this, my friends. You can take it or leave it. We're gonna do this properly, or we're not gonna do it. We're not gonna, but we can skip that argument. All right, right. Let's go on to the second verse. All right. So the first verse was, now there's going to be an inquiry into Brahman. The commentators have to discuss what does now mean. Now for Shankara means you have to have these 4. You have to have a desire for liberation. You have to have vairagya. You have to have viveka. You have to have certain kind of, a bit like Kriya Yoga. You've got to be ready for it. And they have to respond to the objective, which is saying, why are you wasting your time inquiry into Brahman? Do Vedic rituals. You'll get the good things in this world and the next. They have to respond to that. And both of them, at least they both agree that this Vedic ritual is useless because it only gives you temporary things. We now move on to the second sutra. The definition of Brahman, right? Just like Patanjali, first sutra, he tells you, Atta, now we're going to do yoga, and then he gives the definition. What is yoga? Chitta vritti nirodha. There's a typo here. Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. So now, having established what the now is, having established that there's value in inquiry into Brahman, because it's the only thing that's permanent, everything else is temporary, having discussed all of that, we get to the second sutra. Right, what is this? Brahman, Janmadi Asya Yataha. There's only 3 words. Brahman is that. It doesn't say omniscient, omnipotent. That the author has added that. The definition of Brahman is that from which proceeds the origin, sustenance, and dissolution of the world. This is the definition of Brahman. It's kind of like intelligent design. If any of you know about the intelligent design position in science, that the universe is so incredibly fine-tuned, so it's just absolutely incomprehensibly complex, that there must be intelligence behind it. So the definition of Brahman is that from which the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the universe arises. So creation in the Indian system is cyclical. So you have creation, it's maintained, I think, for 8 billion years, and then it dissolves. There is a position in modern science called the there is a position that sort of, had some mileage, I don't know, in the 70s, and is making a comeback, calling it the revolving or the bouncing universe or something, that there's Big Bang, and it's actually speeding up, that the actual universe is accelerating, but there's still a position that at some point it's going to collapse, because whatever is that force that's pushing it out, right, which is counteracting gravity, because gravity is pulling things back. But there's some, they call it dark energy, right? 90-something% of the universe, dark matter, dark energy. You can't see it, you infer it, but something is causing this acceleration. But there's still the position that at some point it's going to run out or reach its limit, and then it's going to recollapse, and then there'll be another Big Bang. So there's actually a position, I think it's called the rebounding universe or something. Well, that would be something that overlaps with this verse that we're reading now, that Brahman is the cause of the creation, maintenance, and Penrose, I think, was associated with that. The creation, maintenance, and the eventual dissolution of the universe. That's the definition of Brahman, that from which creation emanates. Okay? And we're going to go on to discover that it's intelligent. So it's kind of an intelligent design parallel. Okay, let's read Shankara. In the previous sutras, the Sankara, it has been established that an inquiry into Brahman should be made. Why? As it helps liberation, which is the only thing. Anything else is temporary. The celestial realms of the ritualists, they're not, they're limited in value. Now, Brahman must have some characteristics by which it can be known. Otherwise, it's not possible to have knowledge. To know something, it must have some characteristic. For example, if I want to know the tree outside my window, well, it has to have form, it has to have color, it has to have texture, it has to have some kind of characteristic by which I can know it, right? So if I want to know something, that thing must have some property about it such that it can be known. So what is the property of Brahman by which it can be known? And obviously the verse says it's creation, maintenance, and dissolution. Now, the opponent holds, remember the opponent, there's always going to be an opponent. Are we clear? The Brahman must have some characteristics by which it can be known. Otherwise, it's not possible to have knowledge. You have to have knowledge of something. If you're going to say that the Vedanta Sutras is about knowledge of Brahman, but what are the characteristics of Brahman by which it can be known? The opponent holds that Brahman has no characteristics by which it can be defined. It's beyond our world of perception. It's beyond forms and names. So you can't know it then. And in the absence of definition, there can be no knowledge of Brahman and consequently no freedom, right? So the opponent says, there's no way you can know it. And it has no characteristics. And if it has no characteristics, it can't be known. If you can't be known, then it's pointless inquiring into it, and you'll never get liberation. Remember, the Mimamsas want to just eternally cycle in this realm, do your rituals, go to the celestial realm. If you come back down, more rituals, up and down, up and down. So that's the opponent. The sutra refutes that objection and gives a definition of Brahman. What is Brahman? That which is the cause of the world. That's the characteristic. That's the cause. Right now, remember this. Now this is Shankara. The imagined cause of the world is indicative Brahman. Why does he quickly hasten to say imagined? Pay attention. This is Advaita Vedanta. Ramanuja is not going to agree with this at all. Why is it imagined cause of the world? The sutra says, what is Brahman? It's that from which the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the universe comes. Shankara doesn't believe in a universe. He doesn't believe that there is a creation or a maintenance or dissolution. He's off to a bad start, because the very second sutra of Vedanta, that's why scholars say Shankara is, he's a brilliant philosopher, but his philosophy does not overlap with that of the actual Vedanta Sutra. The definition of Brahman is creation, that which supports creation, maintenance, dissolution. It never says these things are superimpositions. The Vedanta never says that. Never says they're imaginary or mirage-like. That's Shankara saying that. And so he has to quickly say, imagined. This is called the Tatastha Lakshana, or the characteristic of a thing which is distinct from its nature and yet serves to make it known. All right, so therefore, there is something, with a character of something, which isn't that thing, but it helps us know that thing. He's going to give an example. Just hang on a minute, okay? I know that was a bit, let's let him explain what he means by that. A characteristic of something which is different from its nature. Remember, Shankara doesn't even believe in the world with creation, so therefore that isn't Brahman, but it's a characteristic by which Brahman can be known. Right, what does he mean? In the definition given by the sutra, the origin, sustenance, and dissolution are characteristics of the world, and as such are in no way related to Brahman, because Brahman is different from the world. Why? Because the world is an illusion, it's false, it's a mirage, it's a superimposition. For Shankara, he's getting into trouble here. Brahman is eternal and changeless, yet these indicate Brahman. They point to Brahman, which is imagined to be the cause of the world, just as an imagined snake indicates the rope when we say that which is the snake is the rope. Classic Shankara. We're walking. If you get this, you'll understand what he means by superimposition. Is everybody doing okay? Are you hanging in there? We got 15 minutes, my friends. Can you hang in there? Classic Shankara. Carl, hang in there. 15 minuti, dai. Okay? You're walking along the road. There is a rope. You imagine it's a snake. It isn't a snake. You've projected. This is superimposition. Remember superimposition? You're in the desert. You imagine there's a lake. You've superimposed lakeness onto what in reality is sand. So you superimpose snakeness or snakehood onto rope. But still, it still gives that imagined snakeness still gives you, for Shankara anyway, that imagined snakeness which you've superimposed upon the rope, at least it gives you an indication that there is a rope there, there's something there. So even though the world, the sutra says Brahman is that from which the creation, maintenance, and dissolution emerge. For Shankara, that's like the snake, they're unreal, but they've been superimposed onto Brahman, and therefore they can serve as characteristics of Brahman. Ramanuja is going to find this totally incoherent. If you find this incoherent, then you are, then Ramanuja will agree with you. But let's try to be respectful, and let's try to give everybody their fair share, their fair time. But we cannot avoid the fact that the major disagreement between Shankara and the other 5 major schools of Vedanta. Okay, so just as an imagined snake indicates the rope, so even though it's not real, the snake, at least there's something there, and that imagined snake points to what is really a rope. So this creation and this universe is imagined, but through it we can get to Brahman, which is real. We have to break through the imagined world, break through the superimposition, break through this illusory world, which is not real. It's never there. But nonetheless, that can serve as an indicator of Brahman. Right. So I hope that made a little sense. And then he goes on now. He says, the scriptures give another definition of Brahman, which describes its true nature. This creation of the universe is not its true nature, because there is no creation. So he's going against what the sutra itself says. The sutra itself says the definition of Brahman is that from which creation emerges. The sutra does not say anything about superimposition and imagination. The world is very real in the sutras, and I think scholars are very aware of that. So now having done, so now he's got to say, well, what is it really then? Well, the scriptures give another definition of Brahman, which describes its true nature. And what is it? And that's the verse from the Taittiriya: truth, knowledge, infinity. This is called the Svarupa Lakshana, that which defines Brahman in its true essence. The definition given in the sutra is not its true essence, this creation business. These words, though they have different meanings in ordinary parlance, right? Normally, truth is one thing, knowledge is another thing, infinity is another thing. They seem to mean different things. Remember, Shankara's Advaita, no differences, only Brahman. So this idea that Brahman is truth and it's knowledge and it's infinity, well, hang on a minute, that's 3 different things. How does that fit into Advaita? They're 3 different things. So Shankara has to deal with that problem, that little problem. How does he deal with it? He says, though these words, though they have different meanings in ordinary parlance, normally when we talk, we use these 3 words in different ways, but they all refer to the same thing. As the words father, son, brother, husband refer to one and the same person, according to his relation with different individuals. So you can have a person who is, a father to his children, but he's a son to his father, and he's a brother to his brother, and the husband to his wife. So it seems like father, son, brother, husband are all different things, but they refer to the same person. So in the same way, these terms, truth, knowledge, and infinity, they're all referring to Brahman. Right, now the next topic. It must not, however, be thought that the first cause of the universe is arrived at by this sutra through mere reasoning, inference, and other means of right knowledge, usually valid in the world. Right? What are the means of right knowledge? Let's go to Patanjali. What does he say about the means of right knowledge? 1.7. What are the means of right knowledge? Right knowledge consists of perception. You know something if you see it. Logic, if you can, you use inference and deduction. We just spoke about dark matter, dark energy. Nobody's ever seen it, but you infer there must be something causing the universe to expand. So that's inference. Verbal testimony. How do most of us know about dark matter? The scientists tell us. We didn't make the inference, and certainly can't see it. So normally, these are the ways of getting right knowledge. So Shankara says, it must not be thought that the first cause of the universe is arrived at through mere reasoning. We just looked at that. Inference and other means of right knowledge, which are usually valid in the sense world. He's saying, no, Brahman can't be known that way. Brahman cannot be established independently of the scriptures. The only way to know Atman and Brahman is from revelation. You can't see it, although Patanjali would disagree with that. We'd say, yes, you can. You drashtu sarupe vastanam. But the Vedantins take the view that we know about these things from revelation. I don't think Patanjali would disagree. He would say, yes, you initially know about it because you heard about it, but then you can chitta vichya nirodha and experience it for yourself. And then Shankara goes on, this is inference. Though from the effect, the world, we can infer that it must have a cause, right? So we look at the world and we say it must have a cause. Is it God or Big Bang? But, you can make an inference. He says that's true, but we cannot establish with certainty what exactly is the nature of that cause. You can look at the world and say it must have a cause, but that's as far as you can go. You don't know for sure what is that cause. So we cannot say that Brahman alone is the cause and nothing else. Inference might say it has a cause, but what if there's two gods? What if there's, demon? What if there's, you don't find it's got a cause, but you don't know the nature of that cause. So inference is not going to tell you what the nature of the cause is, because Brahman is not an object of the senses. You cannot perceive it with the senses, and to make an inference, you have to perceive things, and then you make an inference. So you perceive that the universe is expanding, you perceive that, and then you make an inference that there must be something causing that expansion. So inference is always parasitic on sense perception. Any inference is based on a sense perception. How do you know there was a Big Bang in the first place? Because the universe is expanding, and so you just expand it back. Then it must have started from some singularity, right? If something is expanding, you can draw a line like this. Well, then draw it backwards then, and it must have started at some point. So that's inference. Okay. Let's keep going. So we cannot say that Brahman, through inference, it's not going to tell you very much. The relation of cause and effect can be established where both the objects are perceived. So you see smoke, the effect, and you infer fire. But how do you do that inference? Normally, okay, Big Bang is a separate sort of thing, but normally, every time you see smoke, there's always fire as the cause. And so every single time your parents, people in Africa, people in China, people in India, people in America, every time they see smoke, nobody ever questions it, comes from fire. So you can, from the effect, you can, you've seen the relationship of the effect and cause. You've seen smoke always coming from fire. So one day you just see smoke, you don't see the fire, but you can infer it must be a fire. Why? Because in all other instances, that's always been the case. So the relationship of cause and effect can be established where both the objects are perceived. When you perceive, consistently you perceive smoke always coming from fire, you see it. And on the basis of that, you make an inference. One day, you don't see the fire, but you make an inference. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. So inference may give only strong suggestions of Brahman's being the first cause. It can give you a strong suggestion, but it can't really tell you much more than that. How long is this? Okay, are we going to have time to, what time is it now? Where are we? Okay, let's see how far we go. Right. So Shankara where is he going with this? He's going to say only scripture can tell you about the nature of Brahman. Inference can give you some idea, but not very strong. So let's keep going. A thing established by mere inference, however well thought out, is explained otherwise by greater intellect. This is so important, my friends. So you say there's an Atman. Well, the Buddhists say anatman. No, they say no, there's not. Consciousness is momentary, interdependent. So who's right? Well, I tell you who's right. Whoever's got the most powerful intellect. So one generation, Nagarjuna emerges from Buddhism and he rules the roost. And then the generation later, some Mimamsa comes up and refutes Nagarjuna. And that's the history of philosophy, my friends. It's not a question that one philosophy defeats another philosophy. No, one philosopher just happens to be smarter than another philosopher. and wins and dominates that generation until, you know, could be Kant, could be Plato, could be Aristotle. They rule the roost for a generation, and then somebody else comes along, critiques them, knocks them off the pedestal, and establishes some other philosophy. Philosophy is endless. There's no philosophy that has survived. I mean, okay, fine, there's Neoplatonists and so forth, but there's no philosophy that has stood the test of time. Maybe bits and pieces do. So someone, they may rule until some greater intellect comes along. That's what Shankara is a very, very important point. Philosophy is not going to give you all absolute truths, my friend. If you seek absolute truth, your only option is Patanjali, Chittavritti Nirodha, and try it for yourself, or revelation. Then you have to, in both cases, you have to have faith. Because to do Chittavritti Nirodha, it might take you 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 5 lifetimes, and that whole time you're operating on faith. And revelation, you have to have faith. And if you say, well, I don't want faith, I'm a rationalist, then you are doomed to eternal Chittavritti Nirodha. Call it Buddhi Vritti if you want. You are doomed to, I don't know if it's doomed, maybe you think that's great. I mean, philosophers here in Rutgers, they think that's a jolly good thing. And you read one thing, and then you read the objection, and then you read the counter, and then you and you spend your life. Let's not call it Chittavritti, let's call it Buddhi Vritti. Let's elevate it. Jnana Vritti. It's never-ending intellectuality. So Shankara is saying, is that what you want? Okay, go for that then. That's not what Vedantins want. Reasoning is endless according to the intellectual capacity of people, and therefore cannot go far in the ascertainment of truth. You cannot get truth through philosophy. You can get brilliant ideas, you can get grand narratives, you won't get ultimate absolute truth. That's going to survive the test of time. Someone will knock it down. So therefore, what is the Vedanta position? The scriptures ought to be the basis of all reasoning. It is experience that carries weight. So he accepts Patanjali. The experience carries weight, yogic experience, and the scriptures are authoritative because they are the records of the experience of master minds that have come face to face with reality. Aptavakya, really important that the scriptures are not just you believe in them because, what are the scriptures? Nothing other than experiences, either of great beings or they're articulated by Ishvara. So they're coming from Ishvara's experience. Either way, the scriptures are not just faith in some old books of Sanskrit. They are the documents of experience, Shankara is saying. And therefore they deserve our attention. And if you say no to scripture, then your fate will be the never-ending, what he just says, never-ending churning of intellectuality, which might be a very nice thing for a life or 2 or 3 or 4, but at some point you're going to become intellectually exhausted, just as you become intellectually exhausted with sense pleasure, just as you become exhausted with the inability to find deep satisfaction in sense pleasure, you become intellectually exhausted with never-ending intellectuality, my friends. If you don't believe me, spend a few lifetimes and we'll check back in some future birth. Send me a WhatsApp in wherever it will be. A few births now. Do a seance and invoke and send a message and say, yes, Shankara was right. Enough of this. Okay, let's see what Shankara says. All right, on we go. The scriptures are authoritative because they're the records of the experience of master minds. What does that mean? They've come face to face with reality, metaphoric way. They experienced this. That's why the scriptures are infallible. So so what's he saying? He's saying it's based on experience. The scriptures are based on experience. In that sense, they're not exactly empirical, but sort of transcendentally empirical, not empirical in the mundane sense perception sort of way, but in the Patanjalian Svarupe Vastanam sort of way. Everybody good? Few more minutes. Alex, you there? Alex, how's our man Alex? The prime object of this sutra, therefore, is not to establish Brahman through inference. What is it then? To discuss scriptural passages which declare that Brahman is the first cause. Remember, Vedanta is all about discussing the Upanishads, clarifying, systematizing, dealing with apparent contradictions. So, and therefore, what is this definition? What does the sutra say? What's the definition of Brahman? That from which creation, that which precede the origin, sustenance, and dissolution of the world. Why does the sutra say that? Why does it define it like that? Because the Taittiriya says that. What is the Taittiriya Upanishad? Right, T-A-I, Taittiriya Upanishad. See it down here? What does the Taittiriya say? That from which these beings are born, by which they live after birth, and into which they enter at death. Try to know that. That is Brahman. This is the Taittiriya. Is this being recorded? It's not being recorded.
No, it is. It is.
It is.
Why doesn't it say that? Right, we'll finish.
We see it as, we see the indication that it's recording.
Excellent. Right, let's finish up this and we'll stop, and then we'll read Ramanuja on 2 next time. So the sutra collects the Vedanta texts for the full comprehension of Brahman, meaning the Upanishad. Once the scriptures, by the way, only means the Upanishads, 95%. Occasionally, they might quote a Rig Vedic verse, but not a ritualistic one. Occasionally, there's the odd Vedic verse, which is more jnana, which has more, which is favorable to what they're interested in. But otherwise, it's 95% Upanishads. Right. Once the scriptures have declared Brahman to be the first cause, what causes Big Bang? Brahman. Reasoning then secondarily may be taken advantage of. First the scripture, then we apply reasoning to the scripture. That's the Vedanta position. They don't reject reasoning. They're just saying reasoning by itself is never ending and therefore useless. But scripture is authoritative because it's coming from masterminds. Once you accept the scripture, then you apply reasoning to try to understand the scripture, which is exactly what the Vedanta Sutra sets out to do. So once the scriptures have declared Brahman to be the first cause, then reasoning may be taken advantage of. In what way? Insofar as they do not contradict the scriptures. Your reasoning, it cannot contradict the scriptures, so you might call that dogmatic. A philosopher would say, well, that's dogmatic then, and fair enough. Then the Vedantins would say, yes, you don't want that, then go buddhi vritti forever then. Buddhi vritti, my friend, for 10 lives, we'll come back to save you in 10 lives' time. But yes, scripture, we can use inference and reason, but we don't challenge the scripture, otherwise we're left with nothing. Otherwise we're left with only reason. So notice this, I'll say it again. It's so, yes, once the scriptures have declared Brahman to be the first cause, then reasoning may be taken advantage of, insofar as they do not contradict the scriptures, but rather supplement them in ascertaining the sense of the Vedanta text. Exactly what a Christian theologian would say. Exactly what Aquinas, Augustine, Origen would say. So such reasoning must be corroborative of the truth. It must support the Upanishads. This kind of reasoning that's supportive of the scripture include the hearing of the text. This is the classical, this is Shankara's method, actually. What is the method of Shankara, Advaita Vedanta, of the Jnana Yoga? There's no bhakti here. Ramanuja is going to have heavy bhakti. But Shankara, right, because ultimately for Shankara, bhakti is illusory because Ishvara is illusory. So what kind of reasoning does Shankara accept in support of the scriptures? But first of all, Shravana, you hear. To hear the text, right? You've got to hear this text. Then you think about the meaning, manana. Then you meditate on them, nididhyasana. And this leads to samadhi. So this is the 4-step process of Advaita Vedanta. What is the method of Advaita Vedanta? Method of Patanjali, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Method of Karma Yoga, Yat Karoshi, Yadashnashi, offer it to Krishna. Method of Bhakti, offer everything to Bhagavan. These are methods. What is the method of Advaita? Not Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. Other Vedanta is going to be different. Advaita Vedanta, what is their method? What is their, what is the specifics of what they do? What is their sadhana? What is their actual practice? You get up in the morning, you're a Advaita Vedantin, you're a full-time Advaita. What do you do? This is what you do. Shravana, you listen to the texts. We would read them. 2, you engage them with reason. You think about the meaning. Manana, you can't, at this point, you can apply reason to them, not to challenge them, but to understand how they are true, not if they are true. Big difference. You do not ask if they're true, which a philosopher would do. You ask, how are they true? You may acknowledge, well, there's a contradiction here, that this seems to be with one thing here. You can acknowledge all of that, but you have to resolve it. You can't reject it. Then you meditate on them. And this leads to what he's got intuition, it means samadhi. What is samadhi? My friends, listen. This is important. What is samadhi? We know what samadhi is for Patanjali. What is samadhi for Shankara? Look. Samadhi. What is samadhi? It is the vritti. So it's not chitta vritti nirodha. Patanjali's nirodha or vrittis. No. Shankara is a special vritti. It is the vritti of the chitta which destroys ignorance about Brahman. You do not nirodha the mind in Advaita Vedanta. The mind has to, which is a bit like what Patanjali says actually in chapter 2, strangely enough, because in chapter 2, Patanjali, when we get towards the, the Ashtanga Yoga verses, he says, by the removal of ignorance, some yoga is removed. This is the absolute freedom. The means of liberation is uninterrupted, discriminative. This is Advaita Vedanta. Here, Patanjali is not talking about chitta vritti nirodha. He's saying, tasya hetur avidya. Avidya is the cause of coming together of the seer and the seen. Tad abhavat samyoga bhavo hanam tadrishahe kevalyam. When ignorance is removed, the samyoga, the coming together of the seer and the seen, is removed, and that's freedom. And how do you do it? Viveka kyatir, an unbroken stream of viveka. That's pretty much what Shankara is saying. By intuition is that vritti, which is viveka's a vritti. Viveka's a vritti. It's not a chitta vritti nirodha state. Viveka's a vritti. It's a state of mind. It's not a nirodha state. So even Patanjali says something a bit like this in chapter 2. It is a vritti of vidya, of viveka. What does vidya do? It destroys avidya. It destroys the ignorance about Brahman. Again, right? Avidya causes bondage. Get rid of it. Free. How do you get rid of it? Viveka. Viveka gets rid of avidya, or you could say vidya gets rid of avidya. Shankara is saying that. When the ignorance is destroyed by this mental modification in Brahmakara vritti, your mind is absorbed in thinking of Brahman, and there's various meditative ways of doing that. There's various props that can be used that are discussed in the Vedanta Sutra. There's various contemplative, the content of the mind. There's various passages in the Upanishads that you can contemplate that are called, that are meditations. And so you use those to destroy avidya. It's not a chitta vritti nirodha practice. Don't think chitta vritti nirodha is, all schools follow that. So when that ignorance is destroyed, then by this contemplating on Brahman, this is what jnana yoga is, not chitta vritti nirodha, then Brahman, which is self-luminous, reveals itself. If you take the cloud away from the sun, you just take the cloud away. The sun is there, it's always been there. It will reveal itself. If you take the covering away from a light bulb, the light bulb reveals itself. It was always there. So in ordinary perception, Shankara says, when we cognize an object, let's say the tree, the mind takes the form of the external object, which destroys the ignorance about it. And consciousness reflected in this modification of the mind manifests the object, right? So we are ignorant. What's outside my window? Well, I don't know what's outside. I'm in ignorance. I look out the window. There's a tree. The senses contact the tree. The tree then becomes transmitted into my mind. I now have a vritti of the tree. So my ignorance of the my ignorance is removed and it's replaced by a nice samskara of the tree. So this is a regular perception. But in the case of Brahman, it's a little different because Brahman is not an object of the senses. The mental, so what happens in the case of Brahman then? What is this vritti of Brahman? The mental modification of Brahman destroys ignorance. It doesn't, unlike the tree, where the mind actually contacts the tree and then the tree samskara is transmitted into the mind. You can't do that with Brahman because the senses can't contact Brahman. So then how does it work with Brahman? Well, the contemplating Brahman through various methods, what does it really do? What is the process? It removes ignorance. And it doesn't actually, the mind can't reveal Brahman. The mind can remove ignorance, then Brahman reveals itself. It's like Patanjali, because Patanjali, you nirodha the vrittis, tada drashtu sarupe vastanam, then the self manifests. So it's exactly the same in that level, but the method is different. In Patanjali, you nirodha her completely, whereas in Jnana Yoga Dvaita, you don't nirodha her, you use the mind to contemplate Brahman through certain mental metaphors for Brahman. The Upanishads provide contemplative alambanas, representations of Brahman, and those mental representations remove ignorance, and then once the mind is really it's pure, Brahman just reveals itself. So the mind can't reveal Brahman, it can purify itself, and then Brahman reveals itself. So in the case of Brahman, however, the mental modification destroys ignorance, but Brahman, which is consciousness, pure and simple, it manifests itself because it's self-luminous. That's why the scriptures describe Brahman as not neti, the Brihadaranyaka, two different places, says Brahman is not this, not this, not this, not this, not this. You remove everything, and then once you've removed everything, then Brahman reveals itself. Patanjali, again, you do that by brute force, by stopping the mind completely, not this. The goal may be the same, although Patanjali is a pluralist and in some ways it's different, but the mind is used to remove ignorance. Okay. Nowhere is Brahman described as it is this, it is this. So Shankara is saying, the Upanishads say Brahman is not this, not this, not this. Nowhere as it says it is this, because anything that you know it is this is a material thing. Right. So quickly, there is thus a difference between an inquiry in Brahman and an inquiry into religious duty, dharma. So the Mimamsas are interested in dharma, and there's a difference. In the latter case, the dharma, by the way, here means the Mimamsa, the Vedic ritual. Again, these terms mean different things. This is 8th century. The dharma here means the Vedic ritual and the whole social order that maintains the Vedic ritualism. And later on in the Gita, or later on, well, the Gita's earlier, by extension, it comes to mean your duties, your occupation. But in the Vedic period, all of those other aspects of dharma was centered on the main pivotal dharma, which was the perpetuation of Vedic ritualism. That's how Shankara's taken it. In the latter case, dharma, the scriptures alone are authority. The Mimamsa say that if you do such and such a thing, you'll get such and such a result, right? You do your Vedic ritual, you go to the celestial realm, you want a son, a daughter, do another ritual, you do this and that, and you'll get this and that result. It is something yet to come. You don't have it. When you do a Vedic ritual, you want something you don't have. You want to go to a celestial realm. You don't have it. You want a child. You don't have it. So it's something which is yet to come and doesn't exist at the time. So when you do a Vedic ritual, you don't have that thing. That's why you're doing the ritual, to get something you don't have. So no other proof is available regarding the truth of these statements except faith in them. So if you do Vedic ritual, you have no proof it's going to work other than you have faith that the ritual is going to work. But Vedanta is different. How is it different? It speaks about Brahman, which is an already existing entity. You already have it. You already are Brahman. So unlike a Vedic ritual where you're doing a ritual to get something that you don't have, in Vedanta, with Shankara's of Vedanta, you already have it. And therefore, it's not dependent on human endeavor. There's nothing you can do. Vedic ritual, you do something. You have to pay the priest. You have to chant the hymns. You have to make sure that everything's done perfectly in the sacrifice. You're doing all these things, and then you get something you don't have. Whereas the Atman you already have. And actually, there's no human endeavor. So what is Jnana Yoga then? You're removing ignorance. There's nothing you can do. Brahman reveals itself. There's nothing you can do to make Brahman. It's already there. So what you do is remove the obstructions. That's not the same as Vedic ritualism. You're not removing obstructions in Vedic ritualism. You're doing something to get something you don't already have. Right? So, but Vedanta speaks about Brahman, which is an already existing entity and not dependent on human endeavor, unlike a ritual. Therefore, besides faith in the scriptural texts, there are other means available to corroborate its statements. That is why there is room for reasoning in Vedanta. So now he's saying, fine. Previously he was saying, you only really know it about scripture, but he's not an anti-rationalist. He's saying, okay, fine, but besides the scriptural text, there are other means to know it. Jnana Yoga, or you could even do Patanjali Yoga. They don't reject Patanjali Yoga, as we will see. So therefore, there is room for reasoning, etc. in Vedanta. There's no room for reasoning in Vedic ritualism. There's nothing rational about Vedic ritualism. You have faith in it, you do the sacrifice, you get the results or you don't. There's no place for reasoning in it. I mean, that's kind of what he's saying. All right, my friends, I'm getting hoarse from yelling. For some weird reason, whenever we do Zoom, I find myself yelling. I have no idea what you were expecting or anticipating, but you get a taste for this. That you do develop a taste for it, and I sometimes I love it, and sometimes I just think, oh God, this is just chitta-vritti. But I think it's really important for you all to at least get a little bit of a sense of what Vedanta is all about. So there you have it, and we'll take questions. And let me see, is there anything in the, oh my God, look at the chat, 78 chats. Holy smoke.
Professor, could I pose a question?
Yeah.
If you don't mind. This is John.
Hey, John, how are you, John?
Doing okay, thank you. It's good to see you
hear
and
your
some of
voice,
the faces I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
Professor, I don't know if there's time for a complete answer for this, but it's a stumbling block to my understanding whenever I look at Shankara.
Yeah.
And maybe we could speak to this, or you could speak to this in the future.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to, I always get the sense with Shankara, with monism in general, even Western versions of this, right? Yeah. It always seems to be a bait and switch going on. It's like, I am Brahman. Brahman is perfect and complete, and it's a perfection in itself that doesn't need to be enhanced in any way. And yet I have to break my ignorance in order to come to terms. And I'm looking at it, if I'm understanding it correctly, that in its purest sense, at best, I'm an instantiation of Brahman. And he's saying I'm an ignorant instantiation. So I don't realize I'm an instantiation of Brahman. Yeah. But when I look at it logically, it's almost like when I'm dreaming, I can have a false perception of myself. But really, I don't care about the me of my dreams, because when I wake up, I'm me. And that's temporary. So why is there so much energy being put into realizing Brahman when I'm already Brahman, and Brahman isn't enhanced or inhibited by my ignorance. You see where I'm going?
I'm not sure if I see where you're going, John, but Shankara uses precisely that metaphor, that you're in your dream, you experience all kinds of things, and then you wake up and you realize you weren't that dream.
Yeah.
So just as that's the case in the world of the dream, what you're thinking of as your real self is actually a deeper level dream. And in this deeper level dream, you're getting old, we are getting old, we're suffering, with all of these things. And we need to wake up precisely just like the dream metaphor to our real self. And if we wake up to that real self, then that's eternal, blissful, and free of all suffering. So
and that part I think I understand. It's the part that if I am truly Brahman, and I'm looking at the monist position, if I'm truly Brahman, does the fact that John Mealy, who's just an illusory instantiation of me, is in delusion, it doesn't take away from Brahman. So why does John have to wake up? There's no self to worry about, because ultimately I'm Brahman. You see where I'm going?
I mean, that may be what Shankara's opponent will find is incoherent about Shankara.
And that's where I'm going with
it. If there really isn't a world, there really isn't a you, all of this is a superimposition, then why do you need to do anything? You are that Brahman, and the opponents are going to say, well, why do you not realize you're Brahman? Because of Maya. Then what is this Maya? What is this illusory superimposition? Call it whatever you will, an upadhi. What is it? Is it in Brahman? Is it separate from Brahman? Is it part of Brahman? I don't know if you want to, and I don't know if I'm steering your question in the...
Yeah, you're steering it in the right direction, and that's where I'm going with that.
Well, in that case, Ramanuja would say, Kasya avidya, what is this illusion? It can't be in Brahman, because the very nature of Brahman is sat and chit, so you can't have at-chit, you can't have it can't be separate from Brahman, because then you have a dualism. It can't be covering a part of Brahman, because then you have a dualism within Brahman, which is, and Ramanuja would say that's our position. So therefore he would reject the whole idea that this dream is unreal, that this whole thing. He would say, no, it's very real. The world is real. You, the individual, are real. You're trapped in a real body, even though it's a temporary one. And therefore it makes sense to extricate yourself from something that's real. If it's all unreal, then why are you suffering? Now, if you're going to say that suffering is unreal, I mean, what do you do with that? If suffering is unreal, then fine. Then don't do anything and keep suffering. And it's all very well saying, well, it's all that suffering is unreal. Well, I'll come and hit you on the head with a hammer, and we'll see how you feel about that unreality. That's a very bit of a tamasic. But I mean, so therefore, so these are the kinds of things Shankara's opponents are going to. Are they going to have the same problem that you seem to be having?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So that was really it. I guess I've been contaminated by Ramanuja too much.
Well, read the first 80 pages. And there's some powerful arguments there. It's the Achilles heel, or from the point of view of his opponents, the Achilles heels of Shankara is, what is this Maya? If in fact you're not an individual, if in fact this body and the world are superimpositions and not real, and they would say this. Take the example of the snake and the rope. Now, okay, it's a rope. Now you project snakeness upon it. How do you do that? You can only do that if you've seen a real snake somewhere in the past. The fact that you can project snakeness onto ropeness, and that's a superimposition, but you can, or a mirage in the desert, but it means you've seen water previously. There must be real water somewhere for you to superimpose it in the desert. There must be a real snake somewhere for you to superimpose it on the rope. So therefore, there must be a real world in order for it to be superimposed on Brahman. That's going to be one of the many arguments that Ramanuja is going to bring forward. But anyway, yeah, read the first 80 pages, John. See what you think of Ramanuja.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sebastian. Maharaj, unmute yourself, yes.
Hello, Professor. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
My question is going to be really quick. Out of the two commentaries that we're looking at in these sessions, taking away Shankara, obviously, if I want to specifically try to bring the Vedanta understanding to the Achintya Bheda school, will Ramanuja get me there by the time like I've gone through it, or should I look also at like Madhava or another commentary?
Well, I would say Ramanuja, I mean, in my opinion, Ramanuja is definitely the basis of Achintya Bheda much more than Madhava is. You know, Madhava is hardcore Dvaita.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I would say Ramanuja is much closer in its metaphysics to Achintya Bheda than Madhva is. I mean, you know, there may be elements of Madhva that Jiva and and Baladev appropriate. Actually, Baladev has been accused of taking a lot from Vallabha, the other 16th century who wrote a huge commentary in the Vedanta Sutra. The Vallabhis are going to say that Baladev, who wrote the commentary, Achintya Bheda commentary, took it all from, took masses of it from Vallabha. I don't know Vallabha well enough to have an opinion on that, but would definitely say that, Ramanuja is a more, nuts and bolts, trimmed down, because he's really being a Vedantin. He's not bringing Narayan in too much. He's really doing the Dharma. He does in his other writing, when he's not commenting on a sutra, when he has his own Vedanta Sara, he writes his own Vedanta Sara. That's much more Bhakti and Narayana and, pretty much Gaudiya, but, more Vishnu, a little bit more Jnana, a little bit more stoic. But when he's commenting on the Vedanta Sutra, in my opinion, he's really respecting the sutras. If you read Baladev's bringing Krishna in all over the place, where the sutra doesn't mention it, and neither do the Upanishads. Krishna doesn't. There's one mention of Krishna in the entire Upanishads, and it's not the Krishna of the Bhagavata Purana. So if you really are going to do the Dharma of Vedanta and you want to respect the integrity of the text, and you don't want to be bringing in all your other stuff, I think Ramanuja does a remarkable job. So if you're looking for, the kind of a really respecting the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra, then I think Ramanuja does the work that then later Gaudiyas can then piggyback on that and then kind of go wild with Krishna being all over the place, and that's fair enough. But Ramanuja's he's really built the infrastructure. I don't know Madhava as well, but Madhava does some pretty radical things. I mean, he's way out there, as a solo. A lot of it, the way he interprets, even which verse a sutra is referring to, he'll disagree with everybody on many occasions. But I don't know him well enough to have a strong opinion. I know he's brilliant, and I know he was a Nyayika, and pretty much he was Nyaya with Narayana kind of added on top, but mostly he's more of a he follows more the Nyaya ontology than anything else. So, but I don't know him well enough to have a strong opinion.
But as a foundational
I would say
school, a foundational idea, Ramanuja.
I mean, my opinion, yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Sylvia. How are you, Sylvia? You got to
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there, for Advaita Vedanta, is Atman and Brahman the same? The terminology means the same thing, or is there a difference?
No, they are the same thing. They're the same thing. The whole point of Advaita Vedanta is there's no Dvaitas. There's no dualism between anything, and certainly not between Atman and Brahman. They're the same thing. Now, the Upanishads usually use Brahman in terms of the cosmic, like it's defined. We just read the definition. the source of creation. So usually it's used in that kind of a cosmic sense, and the Atman in terms of the individual. But other times the Atman is used in a cosmic sense and Brahman in an individual sense. So it's not consistent that way. But certainly for Shankara, they're one and the same.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Sylvia.
Sure.
Shiva.
Hi, good evening, Edwin. It's wonderful to see you again. Namaskar.
Shivaya.
So help me, Edwin. There's quite a pivot in that definition of Brahman in the sutra, and Shankara comes to the table with something that I cannot mesh very well. It's like apples and oranges to me. So you got to help me out. So he has this definition. He comes in about, Brahman, like the sutra definition seems like it's describing the effects of Brahman, the effects of his existence, the origin and the destruction of the cosmos. You said it's kind of a cosmological theme, whereas Shankara comes to the table with, he discusses truth, knowledge, infinity, and those seem more like properties as opposed to like an effect, a causation. And what's interesting is Shankara keeps arguing from scriptures, whereas the other stance seems to be arguing more inference and reason. So they're kind of going around each other, it seems. Am I missing something? I guess I'm having a hard time like connecting the two. It almost seems like Shankara is just changing the conversation to suit his purpose.
Well,
I'm not trying to be hard on him.
No, but at the same time, one doesn't want to, one wants to be respectful, but I mean, Shankara, the definition of Brahman is that look, Janma Adi Asya Yataha, that from whom the birth, etc. of this. So the definition, it doesn't say in the sutra anything about that the world is unreal, that it's a superimposition, that it's like the snake on the rope. That's all Shankara. The definition is there's a real world and it's creation. And so Shankara has a real problem with this. So he has to be a little bit nifty. So he starts off with this little thing, which is not very convincing. Well, a snake can indicate that there's a rope. Even though the snake is false, it still serves as an indicator. That's not a very literal, or, I mean, his opponents are not going to be impressed by that at all. And then as soon as he can, he starts talking about what he wants to talk about, which is, well, what is Brahman? It's, he's not comfortable with his creation definition because creation is unreal for him. So as soon as he can, after the quick paragraph, talking about the snake superimposition, then he starts talking about what Brahman is, and now he's much happier, and it's truth, it's knowledge, it's infinity, these is real nature, and so on. So if you're having a problem with what he's doing here, then you'll be in the company of the Ramanuja and Madhva and the all the Vaishnava commentators who are going to say, wait a minute, the definition of Brahman doesn't say anything about the universe being false or a mirage or a superimposition. It says Brahman is the source of creation, period. So you may not be in Advaitin, is really what you may be discovering.
Well, I'm not really making that claim. I'm just being critical of the argument. And there's a big disconnect. I think you're right. He has a real problem with that sutra, it seems.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Okay.
stepping in.
Yeah. Tim. I don't have a work. Tim? Not there. Jason?
I think he put his question in the chat.
Let me see. Okay, Tim.
What is the relation between Brahman and Ishvara?
For Shankara, Ishvara, the creator, right? Everyone agrees that Ishvara means Ish means to have power. So Ishvara means to, the being that has the most power. And what is the most powerful thing you can do is create, right? So Ishvara is a creator who creates a creation. But if you say the creation is illusory, then that means create. If the creation is illusory, then creating is illusory, then creator is illusory. So ultimately for Shankara, Ishvara is also just like the world, just like creation, just like the individualized Atman is also an illusion. So therefore he will say Ishvara is God in the illusion, in the mirage world. So sometimes he'll talk about Ishvara, but then he very quickly adds, but of course Ishvara is also a superimposition. For Ramanuja, Brahman is Ishvara. That source of creation, right? The definition we just looked at, that Brahman is that from which creation emerges. For Ramanuja, Brahman and Ishvara are synonyms. So just like like in Christianity, you may say God, you may say the absolute, you may say Yahweh, you may say Jehovah, and they're all synonyms. So for Ramanuja, Brahman and Ishvara are synonyms, that Brahman, which is that very Brahman, which is the cause of creation, is none other than Ishvara Narayana Vishnu. So for Ramanuja, Ishvara is Brahman. For Shankara, Ishvara is a superimposed Brahman, like the mirage superimposed upon the desert. It appears to be real. So as long as we are trapped in the mirage, we do bhakti to Ishvara, we worship, he'll promote bhakti, same as Vedic ritualism. He'll say, yes, it's kind of purifies you, but eventually it'll all dissolve, and there's no separation, there's no dvaita, it's advaita, there's no dvaita, there's no distinction between you and Ishvara, and everything is just Brahman, and Brahman has no form, no quality, because forms and qualities are dualism. Something has a form and something else has another form, right? The tree has a form, the mountain has another form, the tree has certain qualities, the mountain has different qualities. So if you have no names and forms, then Ishvara has a name and form. All of that dissolves in ultimate for Shankara, once you become fully realized. I hope that helps, Tim.
Do you want the follow-up?
Well,
He
no, Patanjali says Ishvara is a Purusha Vishesha, he's a special Atman, he's Klesha Karma Samaya Navichinnaha, he's never been affected by Kleshas and Karma, he's the guru of the ancients, he's omniscient, and he gives samadhi. So literally, Patanjali gives us very little information about Ishvara. Patanjali is mostly interested in saying what he really wants to do with Ishvara is say Tasya Vachaka Pranavaha. He comes as the sound Om, and Tajapa Tarartha Bhavanam. You fix your mind on Om, and that's the best way of doing meditation. So Ishvara in Patanjali he doesn't talk about creation. He just tells us that Ishvara comes as Om. He's a special kind of Purusha, never been affected by the kleshas. He comes as Om, and he can give you samadhi. So we don't get very much, we only get about 20 words in Patanjali that specifically say anything about Ishvara, because Patanjali's interested in Chittavritti Nirodha, so you have to fix the mind on something, and so he's very partial to Om, which he calls Pranava. Mary Ellen. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I've learned previously, I don't see why it's such a problem that he's saying that, well, the Vedanta Sutra, right, is saying that from all, comes out of Brahman, all of this, because from what I learned previously, it's like everybody's acting like, oh, he thinks that, we're just running around in an illusion, but isn't the idea that what's not real is what is subject to death, decay, and destruction? So it's not that he's saying that, oh, you're just deluded, because you are in Maya, aren't we? That we're in this illusion, but it's real in the sense that you know, from day to day, and certainly in the temporal sense, it's real in that sense. It's not ultimately real. So why is this such a problem? Like, why are people saying this is such a problem?
Because Shankara has two-tiered reality. He has Vyavaharika and Paramartika. So there's conventional reality.
Yeah.
And then there's ultimate reality. Conventional reality is ultimately not real.
Right. So what's the problem? I mean, in other words, like everybody's kind of saying, well, I don't get it. You know, what he's saying doesn't make any sense, but it does make sense, doesn't it? If that's what he means.
Not to his opponents, because let's put it in the mouth of Ramanuja, because let's keep it within the Vedanta conversation. Ramanuja is going to say, if the world is not real because it's Maya, what is this Maya that makes it appear to be real? And he's going to push that. He's going to have a number of arguments. What is Maya? Is Maya a part of Brahman? Is it separate from Brahman? If you introduce Maya, then you've introduced a duality. That's what Ramanuja is going to try to say. Is Maya in Brahman? It can't be in Brahman, because that's like saying darkness is in the sun. You can't have dark, by definition, the sun is luminosity. So you can't talk about a dark sun. That's incoherent. Now, do you want to say Maya covers a part of Brahman? But you can't do that if you're an Advaitin, because that's created parts. That means you have a dualism within Brahman, which is what Ramanuja accepts that. He says, yes, there's a part of Brahman, which is Narayana and God. There's a part of Brahman, which are the souls. There's a part of Brahman, which is the world, and they're all real, they're all eternal, they're all individual. But that's Ramanuja, it's not Shankara. So therefore, you can't say Maya is a part of Brahman. Is it something outside of Brahman that kind of covers Brahman? Again, you can't have Maya as outside of Brahman, because then you create a duality. So Ramanuja is going to fundamentally disagree that the world is unreal. He's going to say it's temporary, but the three gunas are eternally real. The ultimate stuff of the universe is ultimately real. The Atmans are eternally individual, and Ishwar is not a part of the superimposition, is an eternal supreme being. So there's a lot at stake here. There's major differences in their metaphysics. I mean, you know, one can choose whichever version one wants, but we have to accept there are, you know, there's nothing more. I mean, the fundamental, is the world real? Is it not real? Is God a person? Is God not a person? Is the soul an individual or not? There, I mean, and these are basic, the most fundamental of things that, you know, that human beings try to understand through science or philosophy or religion, and they disagree radically on this. So if one finds Shankara coherent, then one becomes an Advaitin. If that's a coherent thing to say, if there's some skaras one has in one's mind, that's what it boils down to, finds the idea that, okay, there's a conventional reality and we're running around in it, but ultimately it's all false, then ultimately where we always have been and always will be, Brahman, and actually none of this really exists. If one finds that, you know, coherent, then one's an Advaitin. If one finds that incoherent, then one's going to maybe be more partial to other types of interpretations of reality.
Thank you.
I mean, you know, this is why we study Vedanta. We do Svadhyaya and we find out what we resonate with. And that's hopefully one of the things that we'll accomplish in the workshop. You know, we get a better sense, you know, if we want to be an Advaitin, get a deeper understanding of what it is. And the best way, by the way, to understand something is look at it from the point of view of the opponents. That's why they're constantly introducing the opponents. So if you really want to be an Advaitin, if one really wants to be an Advaitin, it makes a lot of sense to look at Ramanuja's criticism of Advaita. And obviously Shankara didn't get a chance to criticize back because he was 2 centuries earlier. Yeah.
He's dead.
He's dead. But you know, later Advaitins, I mean, this conversation has been going on for 1200 years, and they all know they all read each other's commentaries. So they're still very deeply entrenched in their Vedanta perspectives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Edwin. Thank you. And thank you for doing this. It's great. I wanted to ask about the connections to Patanjali, and in particular, the Chittavritti or Chittavritti that Shankara was talking about there toward the end of what we were reading, and Patanjali's Sabija Samadhi. Is there a connection there? I mean, it sounds almost like.
But yeah, Sabija Samadhi is complete and utter. These 7 stages of Samadhi, right? You got Savitarka, Nirvitarka, Savichara, Nirvichara, you got Asmita, Ananda, and then you have ultimately Nirbija. So that's actually 7. But the 6 Sabija states, there's 4, and then later they're subdivided into 6. They're all Nirodha states. Whereas Shankara's Brahmavritti is not a Nirodha, but you're contemplating by means of fixing the mind on certain meditative props that are the topic of chapter 3 of the Vedanta Sutras. So, for example, the Upanishads speak about the golden person in the sun, and so you can fix the mind on the golden person in the sun, and they become your meditations. They're called vidyas. So it's not a Nirodha type of meditation. It's more of the mind is contemplating particular images that are given for Shankara, that are given in the Upanishads. And if you fix your mind on those images, such as the golden person in the sun, such as, prana, and there's a list of them, and they're discussed later on in the sutras. We probably won't look at them. So, but it's not a Nirodha, it's more of a contemplation. It's not an absolute and utter cessation of the mind, which all the Sabija states are. They're all complete and utter. By the time you've gone from dharana, right, where the mind is still flickering a bit, and then dhyana, where it's deepened, and by the time you get to the 8th limb of yoga samadhi, even before it splits up into 6, but the common denominator of all the Sabija states is Nirodha, utter Nirodha. Your Nirodha is getting more and more intense, but all of them, that's how they differ from dhyana and dharana. Because they're all the same thing. It's just dharana and dhyana, the mind is still flickering a bit. By the time you get to your first samadhi, you're now Nirodha. And then what happens in the other samadhi states, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into the metaphysical essence of that object of meditation. And eventually you get to the asmita, where the mind is reflecting consciousness back to itself, the Atman back to itself, but they're all Nirodha states. Whereas the Brahmavritti that Shankara is talking about at the end of that passage, it's not a 100% Nirodha state. That's how it's different.
Okay.
I hope that made a little bit of sense.
That made a lot of sense. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Pasha.
Hi, Edwin. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, and I do apologize if it has been asked before. I was kicked out of Zoom for some reason. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on Shankara's argument about how we get to know Brahman exists if Brahman has no characteristics, because wouldn't that make him or it as good as a non-existent void?
Yeah, that's what the opponent is saying. The opponent is saying exactly that, right? He's saying, well, how can you know something if it doesn't have any characteristics? And then Shankara is going to say, well, really, it kind of does, right? So over here, he says the scriptures give another definition of Brahman. He's not happy with this creation definition, but he has to deal with it. So he deals with it. And he says, well, this creation business, it's like the snake, may be false, but it does indicate that there's something's there. So that's the snake indicates the rope. So, you can decide whether you like that argument or not. But here we get then he goes on to say the scriptures give another definition of Brahman, which describes its true nature. So he's not going to say it has no characteristics. He's going to say the nature of Brahman is satyam, jnanam, and anantam. That it is satyam. It has sat, has existence. It's jnanam, which later on becomes, chit, sat chit. It's conscious. So it's not like Prakriti. So that's a characteristic. and it's infinite. It's not limited. It's only limited in the body. So I don't know whether you feel those are positive characteristics. By the way, Shankara is not going to say that these three things are characteristics of Brahman, because that would set up a dualism between a quality and a substance. Normally you have a substance and it has a quality, like the sun has the quality of luminosity, then you're starting to head towards dualism, a type of dualism between a substance and a quality. So he's not going to say that. He's going to say Brahman is, not that Brahman has, because if you have something, then you are different from the thing you have. So if you have a property, then you, the property holder, the property bearer, whether you're a substance or whatever you are, have this other property. So he's not going to be happy with that. Ramanuja will say that. Ramanuja will say that, but not Shankara. So Shankara's going to say Brahman is those three things. So he's going to say it is Satyam, Jnanam, and so therefore in that sense it does have characteristics by which it can be known. And indirectly, he again, you have to decide whether you like the argument or not, because he's bound by the sutra. He can't change the fact that he's writing on the sutra. The sutra says Brahman is that from which creation emerges. You can't change that. Whether you like it, you don't like it. That's what the sutra says. So how does he deal with that within the metaphysics? He says, well, an illusory characteristic can still point to something beyond it. So a snake can point to a rope. If the snake may be illusory, but it does point to something. The mirage does point to something. So that's how he deals with the sutra before going on to say, but there are positive characteristics by which it can be known from the scripture. All right.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Seems like a convoluted
Are you
argument that
wearing
goes
a
in
uniform
circles.
there? What do you got? What do you got a star there? Were you wearing a uniform?
Sorry?
Are you wearing a uniform?
Oh no, this is just the regular outfit I'd use if I'm on doing a prayer or if it's like a holy day.
Oh, I see. You look very smart.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's 2 a.m. here in England, so
Oh, you're in the
just
UK. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, everybody. It is what this. Oh my goodness! It's almost 9 o'clock. Okay, so I hope you all got something out of that, and you'll decide whether to join us next week. But hopefully, your interest is piqued. We'll have a good night, and I'll stop recording.
Thank you, Edwin. Remember.